December 2017. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the Easley River Access area along the Missouri River, less than 10 miles from downtown Columbia. The lights from police vehicle headlights pierced through the frigid morning fog, illuminating a patch of disturbed earth, something that no one was ever supposed to find there. Central? We need forensics and the coroner at Easley River Access immediately. The investigator's voice echoed among the bare trees lining the riverbank. What began as a step to verify a statement after arresting a suspect had now become something entirely different, something that would answer the questions haunting the city of Columbia for 12 years. Beneath the damp, cold soil along the Missouri riverbank, investigators discovered human remains along with familiar personal items. A metal bracelet, faded pieces of denim fabric, items belonging to Hannah Whitford, the 17-year-old girl who vanished from the Columbia Mall parking lot on a winter night in 2005. For more than a decade, Hannah's disappearance existed only as speculation and fragile hope. A young, ordinary girl who left the mall after a club party and never returned home. A car abandoned in the parking lot. A police report called in at 11:20 p.m. that night. A family forever trapped in the moment of waiting for the door to open. Before continuing this shocking story, take a second to subscribe and like the video. Your support helps bring stories buried by time back into the light. The discovery at the Missouri riverbank was not just the end of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets hidden for more than a decade. Because when authorities finally identified the perpetrator and made the arrest, it wasn't a nameless drifter or an external threat to the community. It was someone they had passed on the street, someone with a steady job, someone who had lived normally among them for years. The Hannah Whitford case is not just a solved cold case. It is proof of the persistence of investigators who refused to give up, of families who refused to accept silence, and of forensic science that gave a voice back to forgotten victims. It is also the story of a seemingly peaceful community. When Hannah disappeared in 2005, suspicion flickered briefly and then faded. Life went on, files were archived, but those silent cracks never truly vanished. They were just waiting for the moment the truth was dragged into the light. What makes this case particularly haunting is that the answer was always very close. The perpetrator had been interviewed in the initial investigation, had been cleared, had lived another 12 years with an unimaginable secret. Where are you watching from today? Leave your location in the comments below. Tonight, we will go back to that winter night in 2005, trace the investigation that spanned more than a decade, and witness the scientific breakthrough that brought closure to one of Missouri's most haunting disappearances. This is a story of loss, persistence, concealment, and justice delayed, but never denied. The night of December 20th, 2005, Columbia Mall was immersed in the bone-chilling cold typical of central Missouri, with wind slipping through the sparse rows of cars under the dim yellow glow of the outdated high-pressure sodium lights. Inside the mall, the small year-end party for the singing club had just ended, leaving behind scattered laughter and hurried footsteps seeking warmth. Hannah Whitford, 18 years old, with her brown hair tied neatly in a ponytail and her red scarf still carrying the scent of gingerbread, left through the north door at around 9:48 p.m. She lingered longer than others to tidy up a few things, then said goodbye to a group of friends before heading off alone toward the west parking lot, the area that was less frequented, much emptier and darker than the rest of the mall. The last witness to see Hannah recounted that she walked quickly, but not hurriedly, one hand holding her coat tightly, the other holding her keys, her demeanor completely normal as on any other occasion. Overhead, the street lights flickered unstably, casting patchy light and shadow on the ground. In the distance, a dark-colored sedan was parked dozens of meters away, like a silent black shadow observing, but no one paid close attention at the time. Hannah blended into the darkness at the base of light pole number 27, then vanished from sight. As time passed, the night grew colder, and in a home just minutes' drive from the mall, The wall clock ticked past 10:45, without Hannah returning as usual. At first, the family thought she might have stopped by a friend's house or lingered to chat, but each passing minute in silence spread a growing unease. They called Hannah's phone. No answer. Messages sent went unanswered. By the fifth call, then the sixth, the prolonged silence became something heavier than ordinary worry. At 11:20 p.m., the whole family sat around the kitchen table, the cold white neon light casting pale faces on the mother's expression. They looked at each other, no one voicing what they were thinking, but everyone knew something was completely wrong. Finally, the father picked up the phone, dialed 911, and reported his daughter missing. The missing person call was routed to the Columbia Police Department dispatch at 11:25 p.m., and within seconds, the information was forwarded to the night shift unit as a high-priority alert. December nights were usually quiet, but in the small duty room in the downtown area, the missing endangered alert immediately changed the atmosphere under Missouri regulations. When the missing person is a female minor or young adult, with sudden loss of contact, no history of running away, and disappearing at night, all signs pointed to serious risk. 2 on-duty officers were in their patrol car just a minute later, heading to Hannah's home to verify information on site, the necessary step before launching a wide search. When they arrived, the small house was lit up, the door slightly ajar, Hannah's family waiting with tense expressions. Officer Martin, handling the initial questioning, invited everyone into the living room and began reconstructing the evening's timeline with a series of detailed questions. What time did Hannah leave home? Who was the last person to contact her? Was there any plan after the party? When did her phone go unanswered? Her parents provided the time Hannah left home at 7 p.m., driving her own car to the year-end singing club party, expected to end around 9:30 to 9:45 p.m. No one in the family thought Hannah had any other plans. Her schedule was straightforward: attend the party, go home, prepare for final exams the next morning. The officer continued checking the landline, noting the unanswered calls to Hannah between 10:45 and 11:20 p.m. No unusual messages, no voicemails left. Hannah's last phone conversation was at 6:52 p.m., a short exchange with her mother about something she needed to buy at the mall. No one in the family heard Hannah mention meeting friends or changing plans. When asked if Hannah often stayed out late, her mother shook her head firmly. She always comes home on time. That very statement led Officer Martin to mark an additional red flag in his notebook. Hannah breaking a consistent habit, something very rare in victims who disappear unintentionally. The next step was to re-identify possible places Hannah might have gone. Her best friend texted that the party was at the mall. She left at 9:48 p.m., with no plans to eat out or visit anyone. The list of possible destinations narrowed to one: the Columbia Mall parking lot and the drive home. From leaving the mall to when she should have arrived home was about an 8-minute drive. The gap at 10:45 appeared as an inexplicable silence. Officer Martin briefly radioed his superior: missing time, prolonged loss of contact, no runaway pattern. Request escalating search urgency. Seconds later, approval came. Proceed with round 1 search at Columbia Mall that night. 2 patrol cars were dispatched to the mall. Each family answer, each minute Hannah was absent, each small anomaly connected into a chain of signals, forcing police to act immediately. As he left Hannah's home, Officer Martin glanced at his watch. 11:47 p.m. In his mind flashed the image of the west parking lot described by witnesses: dim lighting, few cameras, empty, ideal for a stranger approach without notice. No one said it aloud, but everyone sensed something very wrong awaiting them at Columbia Mall, and if they wanted to find Hannah safe, they had no time to waste, not even a minute. When the first 2 Columbia Police Department patrol cars turned into the entrance to the west parking lot near midnight, the space was so silent that the engine noise echoed multiple times among the motionless rows of cars. The faint yellow lights cast patchy glows on the asphalt, reflecting off the cold vehicle bodies. That desolation immediately made Officer Martin feel this was a place suitable for a surprise approach without detection. As the headlights swept across the third row, he spotted the familiar license plate. Hannah's silver sedan parked at the edge of the least illuminated area. He signaled to stop, then stepped out, approaching the vehicle with the caution of someone experienced in handling incidents in lots like this. The car being found immediately was the first anomaly. If Hannah had trouble, she would have called home. If someone picked her up, the car wouldn't be sitting there. Both officers first secured the surrounding area. No signs of struggle on the ground, no scratches, no personal items scattered. The asphalt was dry, no clear footprints or strange tire marks. Just a few faint streaks blurred by night dew. The car was locked. Interior lights off. No signs of recent opening or forceful impact. Through the frosted window, Officer Martin shone his flashlight inside. Everything seemed intact, from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. No items disturbed or fallen to the floor. The initial impression was as if Hannah had left the car voluntarily, but her complete disappearance just minutes after leaving the mall raised a much bigger question. The surrounding parking area was scanned in a 20-meter radius. Trash bins, walkways, bushes along the wall, but nothing suspicious found. Meanwhile, the K9 unit arrived. The tracking dog was brought close to Hannah's car door to pick up scent from the handle, driver's seat, and floor area. It sniffed slowly, then inhaled deeply several times, as if trying to identify a faint trail in the frigid air. The handler released a long leash for the dog to freely determine direction. The animal began moving in a wide arc around the car, as if following a trajectory away from the sedan, then suddenly pulled strongly toward the parking lot edge, exactly where Hannah was last seen. Everyone watched, waiting for the scent trail to lead further. But just a few steps later, as the dog crossed the boundary between asphalt and the sparse grassy strip, the trail abruptly vanished. The dog stopped, raised its head, turned left then right, sniffed deeply continuously, and circled briefly by instinct, but still couldn't pick it up. This sudden interruption led Officer Martin to immediately note, if Hannah had left the car on her own feet and continued freely, the K9 wouldn't lose the trail after just a few meters. The high likelihood was that she was taken away by another vehicle, very close to where the scent cut off. Still, per procedure, the search team expanded the radius in a semicircle, from the lot edge extending behind the mall, where there was a tree line and a small trail into semi-wild land. Night wind whipped faces, carrying biting damp cold, making the search harder. Nonetheless, high-powered flashlights swept steadily along narrow paths where victim or perpetrator might have crossed. The West Mall area was poorly maintained. Sunken patches, small dense woods not part of any park, but thick enough to conceal someone in darkness. Officers scanned every meter, checking bushes, flipping abandoned wood planks by the wall, closely examining trampled grass patches, but no signs of struggle, no personal items, no clues leading to Hannah. The K9 was brought back to the lost point once more, but the reaction was identical. The dog, restless, circling, but unable to pull in any clear direction. This reinforced the hypothesis that Hannah did not walk far from the parking area. If she had moved on her own, the path would leave a much stronger scent. The search team then pushed further, crossing an abandoned grassy field, to scan along the forest edge, where wind rustled through branches and darkness nearly swallowed the flashlight beams. They checked the industrial trash area behind the mall, swept the delivery truck lane usually deserted at this hour. Still nothing but suspicious silence. Near 1:30 a.m., when cold wind numbed officers' hands and a thin frost began covering car roofs, the wide search was sufficient for a preliminary but important conclusion. No signs Hannah left the car for personal reasons, nor signs she walked away from the area. The disappearance too clean, too quick, leaving no natural traces. Officer Martin looked back at the lot one last time. Rows of cars standing like silent black shadows, wind faintly howling through metal gaps, and the heavy feeling in his chest grew clearer. This was not a runaway, but something entirely different, more abnormal, more dangerous. Hannah had vanished completely from this space, as if someone had uprooted her from the ground in a few brief seconds, without leaving any signal for the night behind. Immediately after the area around the parking lot was finally scanned with no trace of Hannah found, Officer Martin and the search team promptly moved to the next step in high-risk missing person protocol, collecting direct statements from everyone present at Columbia Mall between the time Hannah left the party and when the family reported her missing. Though the clock had passed 2 a.m., some mall staff remained for end-of-day cleanup, and police had to seize every minute as witness memories fade over time. The first interview took place at the north door, where Hannah's group of friends had lingered a few minutes after dispersing. One of them, Olivia Crane, clearly remembered Hannah leaving with her standout red scarf in the darkness, walking quickly toward the west parking lot. She confirmed Hannah showed no signs of worry or haste, didn't mention meeting anyone afterward, and wasn't looking around as if waiting for a ride. Another friend, Tyler, recounted that right after Hannah left, he briefly saw a man standing near light pole number 27, the dimmest area of the entire lot. The man was alone, dark coat, cap pulled low, holding a half-smoked cigarette. Tyler said he didn't think much at the time, just found the figure odd for standing too long in one spot and barely noticing anyone around. When Officer Martin asked for more detail, Tyler frowned, trying to recall. He wasn't very tall, but stood kind of hunched, smoke drifting across his face. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the shadows. Though the description was vague, the detail of the man smoking in the dim area was immediately noted with temporary marking. POI-1, person of interest, to verify urgently. After the friends, police moved to interview mall closing staff, including night security, cleaning crew, and employees from stores near the west door. A cleaning worker, Janice Hawkins, remembered around 10:15 p.m. while pulling trash carts outside, hearing an engine start, and briefly seeing taillights of a dark sedan leaving the west parking area. What caught her attention was that the car had been parked since early evening, but still there when her shift started. She couldn't recall the exact color, possibly black, dark blue or gray, but the shape looked old, like early 90s style. When asked if she saw anyone get in or near the car, she shook her head, only saying the area was very dark, and she just caught the two red taillights backing up, then heading toward the southwest mall exit. At the same time, night security guard Miguel Torres provided a detail reinforcing Janice's observation. Between 10:10 and 10:20 p.m., Torres saw the silhouette of a dark sedan driving slowly around the lot before leaving the mall. He noted this vehicle was unfamiliar because staff or lingering customer cars usually parked near main entrances, not circling sparsely populated areas. The sedan's departure time suspiciously matched the window when Hannah lost all contact. Miguel couldn't see the plate or driver clearly as the car passed a completely unlit section. As Officer Martin cross-referenced witness statements, a pattern emerged. Hannah heading to the dark lot, where a strange man was smoking, in the same time frame, a dark sedan appearing then leaving, via the least camera-covered direction. No one saw Hannah get into a car. No one saw her leave her own, but her disappearance occurred in too short a window to leave any signs, a factor making stranger approach highly notable. The final witness interviewed that night was a fashion store employee near the north door, who confirmed seeing Hannah laughing normally with friends before leaving. But most importantly, she recalled another detail. When the store closed at 9:55 p.m., she saw a male figure standing very far away in an area barely reached by light. At the time she thought nothing of it, but upon hearing of Hannah's disappearance, that memory suddenly stood out sharper. All the scattered pieces, the man alone in darkness, the dark sedan circling, then leaving the lot, and Hannah vanishing right in that area, when connected, formed a clearer new investigative direction. Stranger plus unknown vehicle, a scenario fitting many opportunistic abductions around Midwest malls, in the early 2000s. Though nothing certain yet, and statements still vague, this direction was immediately marked as the initial focus, because in the cold, silent night of Columbia Mall, those small details were all that remained of the last moment Hannah Whitford was seen. Immediately after collecting statements from the remaining witnesses in the mall area, the investigation team was allowed back into the security area to review the entire surveillance camera system, even though everyone knew that the image quality from the 2005 Columbia Mall cameras was notoriously poor, with many blind spots and such low resolution that faces often appeared only as blurry bright blobs. Nevertheless, in the early hours of a serious missing person case, any signal, no matter how faint or hard to discern, could become the first clue. Officer Martin and the security technician began extracting footage from the time frame between 9:30 and 10:45 a.m., focusing primarily on the north entrance and the parking lot area where Hannah was last seen. The black and white screen flickered with noise, wavy lines running across it, as if the lens were struggling against the cold weather outside. At the 9:48 a.m. timestamp, the team spotted Hannah's figure passing through the door. Her red scarf was just a faint bright streak, even when they slowed it down as much as possible. She turned right, then disappeared from the frame, and that was the last clear frame showing her presence. To verify the details provided by witnesses, the technician switched to the wide-angle camera overlooking the west parking lot. This device was positioned at an unfavorable height, covering only the upper portion of the lot, and the weak lighting made the images even more washed out. However, between 10:05 and 10:15 a.m., an unusual movement appeared. A dark-colored sedan entered the patchy lighted area, paused for a few seconds, as if waiting for something, then lit up its red taillights and slowly moved toward the southwest exit. The investigators replayed this segment multiple times, trying to zoom in on the license plate, but only saw blurry bright spots that were unreadable. They couldn't determine the exact color or make, but based on the overall shape, size, hood curvature, taillight layout, the technician tentatively suggested it could be a mid-size sedan from the early 1990s, which surprisingly matched the initial descriptions from Janice and security guard Torres. Of course, this couldn't confirm that the car was directly involved in Hannah's disappearance, but crucially, the sedan appeared exactly during the unexplained time gap the police had yet to account for. The window from 10:05 to 10:15 a.m., just before the family started calling repeatedly, with no response. As they advanced a few more seconds in the footage, the team noticed a small detail right before the sedan left the frame. Light from the edge of the mall's roof briefly reflected off the body, enough to reveal a glossy dark paint, likely black or dark green. This was the third point of coincidence with witness statements, following the position of the smoking man and the timing of the car's departure from the area. Although the camera provided no faces, no clear view of the driver or anyone inside, this footage still allowed the police to establish a key milestone in the timeline, a suspicious vehicle leaving the parking lot during the exact period when Hannah vanished. By combining witness signals with camera images, the investigation direction began to take clearer shape. Instead of a scattered search, the team now focused on tracing a dark-colored sedan believed to have been present in the critical area at the pivotal moment. In a situation where every minute counted, the appearance of this sedan, even if only captured as a blurry dark shadow, became the necessary piece to open the next investigative path, one centered on a simple but crucial question: whose car was it, and why was it there at the exact moment Hannah disappeared? After the blurry video showing the dark-colored sedan leaving the parking lot during the critical time frame was extracted and analyzed, the investigation team quickly moved to the next step, searching for vehicles matching the general shape characteristics captured on camera. Although the footage wasn't clear enough to identify the make or license plate, the technician and Officer Martin agreed on several features that could be used as filtering criteria: four-door sedan, 1990, 1999 model year, dark color, boxy taillight design, rather than the rounded ones of newer models and medium-length body. Using these initial criteria, the police sent a request to the Missouri Department of Motor Vehicles for a list of all registered vehicles within a 15-mile radius of Columbia Mall that were dark-colored and fit the matching model group. The list came back early the next morning, over 20 pages long, totaling 124 vehicles within the description. This number was much larger than initially expected, but with a major shopping mall and many older cars still common in the area in 2005, sifting through such a lengthy list was not unusual. The investigation team began dividing the list into smaller groups, categorizing by owners' residential areas, registration years, recent sales, and traffic violation histories. The goal of this step wasn't to immediately find a suspect, but to eliminate owners who clearly had no possible involvement. One group of officers was assigned to contact each owner on the list to verify alibis for the night of December 20th. Some owners were elderly, with clear proof they were home watching TV or had gone to bed early. Others were night shift workers at hospitals or stores on the other side of town, confirmed by coworkers. These were quickly placed in the elimination group. Other vehicles were confirmed to be in garages for maintenance on the night of the disappearance, with invoices and mechanic confirmations. A few on the list were noted as inoperable or abandoned in lots for months prior. All these factors helped significantly shorten the list without needing direct contact with every owner. However, many cases remained in the gray area: vehicles registered to parents but used by adult children, shared family vehicles, out-of-town students not at their registered address, or vehicles with unclear movement histories around the time of the disappearance. These were flagged for further follow-up, as they held potential to match the sedan's recorded movement pattern. Notably, among the non-eliminated vehicles, nearly 24 belonged to single owners, with no witnesses to confirm their whereabouts between 10 o'clock and 10:30 p.m. These were often the hardest to assess, as there were no family or coworker statements for alibis. The team also checked reports of stolen or borrowed vehicles in December, but none matched. After hours of data review, schedule cross-checking, verification contacts, and prioritizing cases by suspicion level, the police narrowed the 124 vehicle list down to 58 that were considered unable to be eliminated. The number was still large, but compared to the original list, confirming nearly half as unrelated, gave the team a basis to dig deeper into the remaining vehicles. Those whose owners couldn't prove their location on the night of the disappearance, or whose appearance matched the blurry video footage most closely. And this was the starting point for the vehicle trace that everyone believed was directly linked to Hannah Whitford's disappearance. Immediately after establishing the list of 58 dark-colored sedans that could not be eliminated, the investigation team moved to a crucial step: reconstructing the likely travel routes of the vehicle seen in the video. Because the 2005 Columbia Mall cameras only covered main pathways, with many peripheral areas completely unmonitored, determining the vehicle's escape direction required analyzing both terrain features and nighttime traffic patterns in Columbia. The officers started by identifying 3 main routes leading out of the mall premises. The first headed east, merging into Stadium Boulevard, a busy commercial artery with plenty of streetlights and traffic even late in the mall's operating hours. Traffic cameras in this area, though not comprehensive, existed at 3 key intersections, meaning any vehicle taking this route had a high chance of being captured, even briefly. The second led north along Bernadette Drive, looping through densely residential neighborhoods. Though this area had fewer public cameras, scattered homes and small shops might have private surveillance systems. Moreover, this route forced vehicles through 2 well-lit neighborhoods, unsuitable for someone trying to avoid detection right after an abduction. The third, and most noteworthy, headed south, crossing an almost completely camera-free stretch that ran along the edge of a semi-commercial, semi-wild area, extending outward from the city. This zone included old warehouses, low-stack parking lots, some abandoned buildings, and undeveloped lots. In 2005, the area south of Columbia Mall was one of the largest dark spots on the urban lighting map, something a stranger intending to move quickly and evade tracing could easily recognize when approaching from the west parking lot. From these three routes, the police simulated travel times based on average speeds of 25-35 miles per hour between 10:05 and 10:20 p.m. The goal was to determine the range the sedan could have reached in the first 10 to 15 minutes after leaving the lot. On the east route, a vehicle could only pass through at most two major intersections before being forced to stop or slow for red lights, increasing the risk of camera exposure. On the north route, it would take just 8-10 minutes for the sedan to enter residential areas with potential late-night pedestrians or turning vehicles, factors raising witness chances. Only the south route allowed continuous movement for 12-14 minutes without traffic lights or major intersections, fitting the behavior of a subject deliberately avoiding visibility. When combining travel time with the direction from the west lot, police analysts noted that the sedan's position in the video and its turnout of the mall premises matched most closely with the south exit. This was further reinforced by considering the statement about the smoking man in the dimly lit west area. That spot was only a short distance from the south exit, convenient for quick access to the vehicle and departure before anyone in the lot could notice. Additionally, behavioral profiles of parking lot abductions in the early 2000s across the Midwest showed most perpetrators chose escape routes with the fewest cameras and preferred paths leading to less patrolled outskirts. The area south of the mall, with its open lots interspersed with sparse commercial facilities, perfectly fit this pattern. After completing the time-space model, the investigation team concluded that the south route was the highest probability path taken by the dark-colored sedan. They marked this area as top priority for the next analysis step, as it was the direction most likely to lead to where the perpetrator took Hannah away from any potential witnesses in just a few short minutes. Immediately after analyzing the likely escape route and determining the south direction from Columbia Mall as the most logical choice for the abductor's behavior, the field commander activated the second phase search plan with an expanded scope, focusing on two large areas with terrain features matching crime patterns: Rockbridge State Park and the stretch of Missouri River Bank extending south from the city. Both locations were within a 12-20-minute drive from the mall, fully within the time model built by the analysis team earlier, and had low camera density, dark access roads, and little nighttime foot traffic, making them ideal spots for a perpetrator to temporarily conceal a controlled victim or dispose of initial evidence. As night fell, temperatures dropped sharply, thin fog spread over the roads, and the search team split into three groups, one heading into the rock formations of Rockbridge, one along natural trails and crevices, and the remaining deployed to the riverbank area coordinating with the water unit operating sonar. As they left the temporary command center set up near the park entrance, no one said it aloud, but everyone understood that if Hannah was still alive, every passing minute was a risk. But if she had been killed, this might be the only chance to locate the body or perpetrator traces early to narrow the investigation. K-9 units were positioned up front, carrying scent samples from Hannah's car seat in hopes of detecting lingering traces if the perpetrator had brought the victim into the woods. However, Rockbridge State Park had layers of animal scents, vegetation, high humidity, and shifting winds, making tracking far more difficult than in the mall parking lot. The dogs only reacted mildly at a trail section about 300 meters from the entrance, but couldn't sustain any definite direction, as if the scent trail was abruptly cut off or never strongly present. Due to the distinctive rocky terrain of Rockbridge, the search team used high-powered floodlights to scan cracks, rock cavities, and narrow paths barely wide enough for one person. Every few dozen meters, limestone clusters formed short caves or depressions, requiring thermal cameras to check for signs of a human body, clothing, or unusual items. But all they found were heat signatures from wildlife and nocturnal birds. No signs of struggle, no fabric scraps, nothing suggesting Hannah. Meanwhile, the riverbank search team deployed sonar to scan the bottom in the bend near McBain, rated as easily accessible by vehicle with many light-obscured spots. Sonar technology could detect unusual submerged objects, but in 4 continuous hours of scanning, results showed only sunken logs, protruding rocks, and debris accumulated by the current. Divers were called in to check 2 sonar-reported objects about 1 meter long, but upon diving, they were just water-eroded tree trunks. Combined with cold weather slowing the flow but creating eddies, retrieval and scanning became harder, forcing extended search time with no results. On shore, investigators simultaneously checked potential perpetrator stop points, dirt lots, old truck trails, abandoned warehouse areas. They scanned for unfamiliar tire tracks, cigarette butts, candy wrappers, anything possibly left during a nighttime stop. But recent light rain had washed away any faint traces in the thin mud. Unusual items found, broken plastic pieces, zip ties, old beer cans, showed no links to the disappearance, mostly trash from years prior. By dawn, the search teams had to accept there were no signs proving Hannah had been in the park or river area in the hours after vanishing. This left 2 possibilities. Either the perpetrator took Hannah to a completely different location outside the initial analysis range, or he used the south route to escape the mall, but immediately diverted to an even more isolated area no one anticipated. As they regrouped to report, everyone's faces showed the same disappointment in a vast state like Missouri. The complete absence of evidence in both priority search zones not only negated the hypothesis of victim disposal nearby, but reinforced the idea that the perpetrator had taken Hannah farther beyond any searchable range that night. This meant the entire investigation direction had to expand many more miles, with hot pursuit chances narrowing by the hour. As the sun rose, the dim light of the rock formations and river surface returned to calm, and that very calm made the team realize they had just lost a golden opportunity. The perpetrator hadn't stopped here, and Hannah had been taken to a place they still couldn't imagine. Immediately after concluding the second round of searches, without recovering any direct traces related to Hannah in Rockbridge State Park or along the Missouri River shoreline, the lead investigator decided to shift the focus back to the only item still holding a probability of carrying traces from the perpetrator: Hannah's sedan, which had been sealed at the parking lot scene and prepared for transport to the department's forensic center. The vehicle analysis in Phase 1 was not intended to repeat the previous peripheral observation process, but focused entirely on micro-collection touch marks, skin cells, microfibers, or any form of contact DNA that might have been left behind when the perpetrator approached or interacted with the vehicle before taking Hannah away from the area. Around 7 a.m., the car was transported by a specialized flatbed tow truck to the Boone County Field Testing Facility, where a sealed warehouse was converted into a temporary holding room with stable temperature to prevent sample degradation. A seal-breaking protocol was documented in the presence of 2 forensic technicians, a missing persons case investigator, and a representative from the evidence division to ensure the integrity of the chain of custody. The driver's door was opened first according to regulated procedure, and the entire interior was photographed in high resolution before any tools made contact. The forensic team began with the tape lift technique, using specialized adhesive tape to collect microfibers and cells from the seat surfaces, door handles, steering wheel, dashboard, and inner door frames. They paid particular attention to the exterior driver's door handle, the rubber weather stripping where the door seals shut, and the area below the dashboard where the perpetrator might have inadvertently touched while leaning in to search or control Hannah. Each tape application was coded, sealed, and stored in individual evidence bags to prevent cross-contamination. This was followed by fluorescent powder fingerprint scanning, using blue light to detect any faint oil residues that might have remained. However, initial results showed that most recovered fingerprints were in locations frequently touched by Hannah: the steering wheel, radio controls, climate knobs, and gear shift. A few smudged prints on the outer edge of the driver's window glass were irregular in shape, but their clarity was too low for AFIS tracing, forcing the team to prioritize DNA. Next, Technicians collected samples from the passenger seat and front floor area, as even without obvious signs of disturbance, the possibility that the perpetrator opened the passenger door or temporarily placed an object there could not be ruled out. Using a specialized vacuum, they gently scraped fabric fibers stuck along the seat edges, recovering a few dark-colored fibers that did not match Hannah's clothing as described by her family. These fibers were packaged separately and sent to the trace evidence unit for composition comparison. Meanwhile, another group conducted UV light scanning inside the vehicle to search for bodily fluid traces or unusual fluorescence. The entire interior remained clean, with no visible signs of blood, sweat, or fluids. This aligned with the initial assessment that Hannah left the vehicle without signs of struggle inside the cabin. However, the driver's window glass showed 3 faint fluorescent patches, spaced just a few centimeters apart, suggesting a hand, whether the victim's or someone else's, had briefly pressed against it. These areas were swabbed with specialized cotton tips and placed in chilled vials for preservation. By around 11 a.m., all collected samples were transferred to the Missouri State DNA Analysis Lab. The technology in 2005 could not generate complete profiles from weak touch samples, but it was still capable of amplifying STR segments to identify mixed components. The preliminary report arrived about 36 hours later. Results showed Hannah's DNA in multiple logical locations, but alongside it, mixed DNA from at least 2 other individuals. One of these was determined to likely come from secondary contact, such as a mechanic who serviced the vehicle or friends who had sat in the passenger seat. But the remaining source, present on the inner driver's door edge, exterior handle, and a very small sample on the dashboard vinyl strip, did not match any reference samples from family or close friends. This opened an important possibility. The perpetrator had touched the vehicle, but the level of contact was too low and degraded over time, making the DNA a mixed profile difficult to separate, preventing direct identification. In the report, the analyst noted clearly, DNA mixture consisting of at least 3 individuals, insufficient markers for individual profiling of the third person. This was disappointing, but it reinforced what a veteran investigator had predicted. The perpetrator operated very briefly and cleanly, limiting contact and likely wearing gloves for most of the time, minimizing biological evidence. Nevertheless, the presence of foreign DNA, even if inseparable, remained the first evidence confirming that someone else had interacted with Hannah's vehicle during the time frame of her disappearance. Investigators immediately flagged it as a potential suspect sample and entered it into the central database for tracking. Although the results did not provide a breakthrough, the Phase 1 vehicle analysis still supplied a crucial piece. The perpetrator likely controlled the vehicle for only a few seconds, touching exactly the necessary spots, then removed Hannah from the parking lot in a way that left no visible traces. The investigation was thus forced to expand in the behavioral direction. A cautious individual who left minimal contact traces but could not avoid biological ones entirely. This indicated he was not a complete amateur, but also not professional enough to leave no traces at all. This conclusion led the task force to keep the vehicle in cold storage for preparation of deeper testing in the next phase, in hopes that future technology or advanced DNA separation techniques could clarify the identity of the third contributor, a key unknown, the missing piece of the entire case. Immediately after receiving the Phase 1 DNA report, showing an inseparable mixture with no clear signs of anyone known to Hannah, the investigation team was forced to return to the traditional direction, checking for motive within the known acquaintance circle, the group considered to have the highest probability of harm in no-trace disappearances. The goal was to determine whether any conflicts, obsessions, debts, or forms of tension had existed around Hannah that family or friends might not have disclosed initially. Over 3 consecutive days, a task force was divided into 2 teams, one responsible for direct interviews at the homes of the closest individuals, the other re-examining Hannah's communication history, emails, and social media activity in the 3 months prior to her disappearance. Hannah's family, despite being panicked and exhausted after days of near sleeplessness, cooperated fully, providing all phone records, contact lists, and even private messages Hannah had exchanged with close friends. They insisted that in that week, Hannah showed no unusual mood changes, no conflicts at home, and no signs of financial or academic stress. When asked about the possibility of Hannah having a secret romantic relationship, her mother said she had seen no signs, and close friends confirmed that Hannah usually shared everything and was not hiding any suspicious person in her life. The investigation team then approached the three individuals ranked on the acquaintances with potential involvement list. POI-2, an ex-boyfriend who broke up more than 6 months earlier. POI-3, a teammate in the school club. And POI-4, someone who had worked part-time with Hannah at a seasonal store the previous year. First was the ex-boyfriend, a 19-year-old studying auto mechanics at a vocational school in Jefferson City. Their breakup had been amicable, with no arguments or obsession. Supporting evidence checks showed that on the night Hannah disappeared, he was working the evening shift at a garage, continuously present on internal cameras from 5 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Not only friends confirmed this, but time clock records and cameras matched. POI-2 was immediately cleared. Next, POI-3. A male friend on the school's extracurricular team who had attended group events with Hannah previously. Although some suggested he was overly friendly, after interviewing, investigators found him lacking confidence, speaking timidly, with no signs of obsession or jealousy. His alibi was attending a family birthday gathering for his grandmother, confirmed by more than 10 people. No reason to dig deeper. Finally, POI-4. The former co-worker whom Hannah had complained about for being late. But according to records, there was no personal conflict between them. On the night of the incident, he was in Springfield attending a job fair, with hotel keycard records showing continuous activity in the room during the time Hannah vanished. Additionally, his phone showed no movement toward the Columbia area in the 72 hours surrounding the case. After cross-referencing all timelines, the investigation team officially cleared POI-2, POI-3, and POI-4 from suspicion. Nevertheless, police still checked broader circles: classmates, temporary co-workers, social acquaintances, tutors, teachers. Each was verified. No one had motive, opportunity, or unusual behavior before or after Hannah's disappearance. No arguments, threats, suspicious messages, or signs that Hannah feared being followed. The acquaintance file grew thicker, but useful information was nearly zero. When the task force compiled the report, the conclusion was clear: no motive from any acquaintance, no signs of conflict, relationship breakdown, financial disputes, or personal obsession. The acquaintance investigation direction was officially closed, forcing them back to the coldest wall: a stranger in the night, anonymous, not captured on camera, leaving only a faint DNA trace mixed in an inseparable profile. After the acquaintance direction was completely eliminated and no leads emerged from Hannah's personal relationships, the investigation team decided to shift to evaluating the perpetrator's behavior from a criminal profiling perspective, particularly abductions occurring in parking lots. A type of case considered among the most difficult because perpetrators often leave no traces and have little connection to the victim. The Columbia Police Department requested assistance from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and in a nearly 2-hour online meeting, federal experts provided a compilation of similar cases from the late 1990s to the mid-2000s. Most shared a common pattern: young female victims, often leaving a mall or workplace in the evening, approached within 30 seconds in poorly lit areas, no history of personal conflicts, and perpetrators unknown beforehand. These details matched Hannah's case almost perfectly. The BO emphasized that in such opportunistic abductions, perpetrators typically acted upon an immediate unfavorable condition: empty parking lot, victim alone, car parked in a low-light area, and a moment when the perpetrator could predict the victim would be distracted while unlocking the door or searching for keys. Notably, In the cases analyzed by the FBI, fewer than 5% involved acquaintances. Conversely, 95% were committed by complete strangers, acting quickly and decisively, leaving no blood or physical evidence due to extremely brief contact time. When asked to describe common demographic characteristics for this type of perpetrator, the BAU provided a relatively stable profile: male, age 25 to 40, with personal transportation, familiar with the geography around the mall area, tending to operate alone, and with a history of minor offenses such as petty theft or harassment, but not severe enough for DNA database entry at the time of the crime. They were typically control-oriented offenders, not emotionally impulsive toward the victim. Target selection was random, dependent on real-time conditions rather than pre-planning. This explained why motive-based tracing yielded no results. The BAU also analyzed the silhouette video footage obtained by local investigators. Although blurry, the vehicle leaving the lot between 10:05 and 10:15 p.m. fit the opportunistic perpetrator profile: quick approach, immediate departure upon subduing the victim. Another FBI group specializing in outdoor abductions noted that such offenders often move the victim to a secluded area within the first 10-20 minutes, enough time to escape camera range and witnesses, but not far enough to risk traffic stops. This inadvertently fully supported the movement timeline model built earlier by the Columbia analysis team. When cross-referencing FBI data with all available information, a dark sedan with unclear plates, absence of physical evidence, very limited DNA, no personal conflicts, and disappearance in under 2 minutes, investigators realized they were facing a textbook opportunistic perpetrator, someone who exploited a moment, unknown to the victim, and likely having done something similar elsewhere without being caught. The FBI also noted that many cases from 1999, 2006 in Midwest states shared features: perpetrators with wide operational ranges, not tied to one area, frequently changing vehicles or plates, and particularly cautious about leaving contact traces. The lack of clear foreign fingerprints on Hannah's car, DNA existing only as an extremely faint mixture, and no cabin disturbance were strong indicators that the perpetrator approached from outside, subdued the victim as the door opened, or right beside the vehicle, then moved quickly, without entering the interior. From the comprehensive analysis, the BIU's final assessment: high likelihood the perpetrator had never met Hannah, did not stalk her beforehand, but only in the moment she entered the low-light area. He acted coldly and deliberately, not impulsively, and would not appear in the acquaintance list. With that conclusion, the Columbia investigation team officially shifted focus away from all personal relationships and reinforced the only remaining logical direction: the stranger direction. The one who appeared and vanished in the darkness of the parking lot on the night of December 20th, 2005, as if he had never existed, leaving behind only an unsolved void. 8 weeks after Hannah Whitford vanished on the cold night of December 20th, 2005, the Columbia Police Department's investigation room sank into the characteristic silence that any prolonged missing persons case inevitably experiences: the silence of deadlock. All approaches, from acquaintance checks, behavioral analysis, camera reviews, river sonar searches, to expanded searches in rock forests and southern open lands, yielded no new pieces, no body, no personal items, no physical evidence, no ransom calls, no late emerging witnesses. Even the forests, riverbanks, abandoned lots, and open tracks repeatedly swept with thermal equipment and helicopters became useless as winter erased any remaining traces. Over those 8 weeks, the task force received more than 320 calls, including rumors, false information, baseless tips, and a few anonymous ones that required dozens of hours to verify, only to end in nothing. No matches in Missouri or federal DNA databases. No dark sedans from the remaining 58 traffic violators or suspiciously located vehicles. Even lightly considered POIs, near or far, were fully cleared once final verification files were completed. After the FBI reinforced the conclusion that the case bore typical hallmarks of an opportunistic perpetrator random target selection in seconds, investigators hoped a similar case in a neighboring state might reveal matching leads. But 8 weeks passed with no comparable incidents in Missouri, Kansas, or Iowa. This both relieved them that no additional potential victims emerged and disappointed them for losing linkage opportunities. In Monday morning briefings, the Hannah Timeline Board remained in place, but new updates grew increasingly sparse. In Week 5, the only note, no new findings from forensics. Week 6, no additional witnesses. Week 7, no related federal activity. By Week 8, the lead lieutenant wrote a short, heavy line on the board. Analysis team recommends status change. This was not a declaration of closure, but an administrative action with deep meaning. The case remained open, but no longer progressing. That meant the file was not fully cold closed, but no longer had a dedicated team monitoring continuously, as in the early phase. Instead, it would shift to active review, meaning the task force would only revisit upon new information emerging. Moving a young person's disappearance to open but stalled status was always a moment that made the entire team feel defeated, even if rationally they knew they had done everything possible. In the internal meeting, no one said it aloud, but all saw the obvious: no new directions to pursue. 2005-era technology, especially with extremely low-level touch DNA, did not allow separation of contributors in Hannah's mixed sample. Mall camera systems in Columbia were too limited to reconstruct behavior or plates. No body, no disposal site, no struggle signs, and perpetrator behavior so rational that it created no exploitable mistakes. Outside the department, late February snow continued to fall, covering the parking lot and the paths once marked for searching Hannah in the first days. Inside, her file was placed in a separate drawer, with a new classification code and last update label. A heavy feeling permeated the room, not because hope was lost, but because hope remained with no path leading to it. The Hannah Whitford case officially shifted to open but stalled status. Open yet stagnant, like a breath held in the Missouri winter, awaiting some disruption large enough to awaken everything. From the beginning of 2006 to the end of the decade, the disappearance case of Hannah Whitford gradually entered a prolonged freezing phase that veteran investigators still called the cold silence. A period when the file remained open but no new notes appeared in the margins of the pages. The final efforts from the active investigation phase had been exhausted by March 2006, and from then on, anything called a lead almost always ended in disappointment. Over the course of 4 years, the Columbia Police Department received nearly 90 tips from the community, but most were either phantom witnesses or speculations not based on any direct experience. A man in Ashland insisted that he had seen a brown-haired girl being pushed into a pickup truck years earlier, but when investigators pressed for details, the timeline he recalled turned out not to match the night Hannah disappeared. Even the vehicle description changed each time he retold the story. A woman called the hotline in 2007, claiming she believed she had encountered Hannah at a rest stop in Oklahoma, but the surveillance images that local police sent back to Columbia immediately showed that the woman bore no resemblance to Hannah and was much older. Calls like these, though carrying a sliver of fragile hope, were quickly dismissed and filed under no actionable lead. As more years passed, false tips increased, and each misleading lead wasted many hours of effort, making the investigation team more cautious and eroding their belief that a genuine clue would emerge from the community. Meanwhile, the Missouri Forensics Lab made no significant progress that could support the case. Mixed DNA separation technology from 2006-2010 was still limited. The touch DNA samples collected from the edge of Hannah's car door were only classified as a complex mixture, a complicated mix that the lab could not separate into individual profiles. Traditional STR techniques only allowed confirmation of multiple contributors' presence, but lacked the resolution to identify the third contributor, who was highly likely to be the perpetrator. The federal CODIS system at that time had not yet expanded sufficiently. Many low-level offenders or nonviolent criminals had not been required to submit DNA samples, meaning the perpetrator, if they had prior offenses, could remain entirely outside the databases police relied on. During this same period, the forensics lab proposed retesting the dark fabric fibers recovered from the passenger seat 3 times, but due to the fibers' tiny structure, their origin could not be determined or compared to specific clothing types. Everything led back to zero. By 2008, an internal report from the Columbia Investigation Unit succinctly described the case status: no forensic progress, no new investigative directions, no additional witnesses, no confirmation of suspect vehicle. The report ended with a phrase repeated over many years: status unchanged. The file lay dormant in a gray metal cabinet in the storage area, marked with case code 0512MW, but no longer read weekly or monthly as before. From a case that once galvanized the entire city, it became one of hundreds of open but inactive files. Newer officers sometimes heard Hannah's name mentioned as an unsolved disappearance in Columbia's history, but most only knew it through an old file cover next to faded marker notes. Missing. No body. No suspect. In the records department, the oldest investigator would still unconsciously place his hand on that file whenever he passed by, a habit lingering from the early days when he joined the search for Hannah. But even he gradually accepted that the longer time passed, the slimmer the chances of solving it. The Hannah case timeline posted on the central tracking board was finally taken down at the end of 2009 to make room for newer cases. The map of the southern Columbia area, once marked with dozens of red search pins, was also wiped clean, leaving only faint traces like ghosts of those time-sensitive searches from that year. In the community, the name Hannah Whitford gradually became a sad reminder of a winter night when a girl vanished from the world, leaving behind more questions than answers. Local media occasionally referenced the case in roundup articles about unsolved files, but added no new information beyond the old details. The years 2006-2010 passed like a time when the case existed in a faded state, not completely forgotten, but no longer compelling enough for anyone to believe real progress would occur. In many cases, the freezing phase comes with hope that new technology will pave the way. But in those years, forensic technology had not yet reached a breakthrough. This made Hannah's case seem trapped in thick ice, a layer of ice that no tool from that era had the power to break. The case gradually shrank in the city's daily life, lying motionless in the file storage, as if waiting for a greater upheaval, a breakthrough that no one at the time could imagine. 4 years passed, and that silence covered the case with a layer of dust that only time or some unexpected spark could sweep away. Yet in those cold storage rooms, Hannah's file retained one thing: it was never closed. It was just that no one knew when it might be reopened with real hope again. In early 2011, when the Columbia Investigation Unit reallocated backlog files to standardized storage procedures, the Hannah Whitford disappearance, having lain dormant for nearly half a decade, was transferred to the newly formed Cold Case Unit. On that list, the file coded 0512MW was assigned to investigator Daniel Rhodes, a veteran officer who had just returned to the unit after serving at the federal office in Kansas City. Rhodes had not been part of the initial investigation, and perhaps because of that, he approached the entire file with fresh eyes, unburdened by memories of past failures or the exhaustion from previous years. In his first week, he spent a full 8 hours each day reading every report, every interview transcript, every crime scene photo. What he saw was a case handled thoroughly in the first 8 weeks, but then stalled by the technological limits of 2005 and the lack of direct leads. However, when delving into the timeline of the vehicle leaving Columbia Mall between 10:05 and 10:15 p.m., a detail once considered vague and unhelpful, Rhodes began to notice anomalies. The camera silhouette footage of the dark sedan only provided a general shape, but the timing of the vehicle's movement did not fully align with the initial statement from the mall cleaning staff, who claimed the west parking lot was completely empty around exactly 10 p.m. Rhodes scrutinized the time frame and realized that the camera collection log did not specify the exact starting minute of the video sequence, only listing approximately from 10 o'clock to 10:20, while the technical report indicated the camera's system clock was 4 minutes behind the mall's standard time. This meant the sedan might not have left at 10:05 as assumed, but could have moved earlier, around 10:01 or 10:02, a time when the original team believed Hannah was still in the west exit area. If that timing was off, the argument that Hannah disappeared after 10:05 p.m. might be incorrect. Rhodes made his first note, vehicle timeline uncertain. Possibility perpetrator left earlier and encountered Hannah before predicted point. He then reviewed the 2005 camera layout map and discovered another oversight, the secondary camera behind the service door, which recorded blurry footage and was not thoroughly examined because it did not face the main parking lot, had never been analyzed for reflected light from moving vehicles. The old team deemed it useless due to blurriness, but Rhodes thought differently. In similar abduction cases, he had assisted on in the federal unit, edge cameras, even without capturing license plates, sometimes recorded headlight glows, turning angles, or vehicle speeds. Factors enough to determine precise departure direction. Rhodes marked a star in the file margin. Reanalyze light and reflections may determine mall exit direction. But what made him pause the longest was the gap between when Hannah left the mall's main entrance and 10 o'clock p.m., an 8-minute window barely mentioned in the original investigation reports. The team at the time concluded Hannah walked straight to her car, but no camera confirmed she turned into the parking lot immediately. Rhodes wondered if she had been approached earlier, in a blind spot before reaching her vehicle, and the perpetrator's actions occurred before the 10:05 p.m. timeframe that all prior hypotheses relied on. When cross-referencing his new assumptions with the map and timings, Rhodes realized most initial investigative branches were based on the 10:05 marker, a marker that was not absolutely accurate. The camera time discrepancy could have shifted the entire investigation direction by a few critical minutes, enough to miss opportunities to track the perpetrator in the nearby area. With 3 key notes, misaligned timeline, unexploited edge camera, and the 8-minute gap before 10 o'clock, Rhodes recognized the case had never been re-examined under post-2010 analytical standards when video enhancement and motion reconstruction technologies had advanced dramatically. At the end of his 5th day reviewing the file, he closed the documents and wrote a line in his report to the cold case commander. This case did not reach a dead end, it just stopped at a point where technology couldn't keep up. Recommend full re-investigation. And that was the only moment in 2011 when Hannah Whitford's file was opened with real hope for the first time, after nearly 6 years lying motionless in the darkness of storage. Immediately after Rhodes presented his assessment that the suspect's sedan's mall departure timeline may have been misinterpreted from the start, he proposed prioritizing the restoration of all 2005 video data using new image enhancement technology, a technique that barely existed at the local level when the case occurred. Columbia PD sent the original video files, including the once deemed useless silhouette footage and the edge camera segments around the service door, to the Missouri Highway Patrol's Image Analysis Lab, where they used next-generation light reconstruction software that expanded contrast in dark areas without distorting motion details. What was just a blurry shadow in 2005 now appeared much clearer: the hood line, the roof sweep angle, the trunk tilt, and most importantly, the way the taillight cluster reflected light onto the patchy snow on the ground. Technicians discovered that the taillight glow was not the uniform round shape common in Toyota sedans of that era, but horizontally divided, a characteristic feature of certain Ford and Chevrolet models produced in the early 1999-2004 years. This was the first time since the case began that the vehicle's shape was no longer just a dark sedan, but had actual identifying features. The video analysis team continued extracting frames to calculate body ratios, height from roof to hood, front to rear axle length, windshield curve. A shape-matching algorithm was applied, comparing the silhouette outline to 452 common sedan models in the Midwest region from 2005. The results did not yield license plates, but a set of models with the highest match probability based on angle and overall shape in the enhanced footage. In that list, only 11 models matched the layered taillight structure and similar body ratios, including Ford Taurus 2003, Chevrolet Malibu 2001, 2004, and 2 discontinued Pontiac models. Rhodes immediately requested the DMV Data Analysis Unit to narrow down the 2005 list of 124 dark sedans, this time retaining only those matching the models. Work that took months manually in 2005 was now reduced to a few days thanks to the fully digitized DMV system by 2011. In the report sent back to Rhodes, the short list was now only 33 vehicles, a number no investigator had reached in the 6 frozen years of the case. That number was not just a vehicle list. It carried real meaning. For the first time since the night Hannah vanished, the suspect pool had narrowed to a traceable level of individual owners. Concurrently, Rhodes requested expanded video analysis on the edge camera behind the mall's service door, footage once overlooked due to excessive noise. Technicians reconstructed the reflected light field on the damp concrete, a sophisticated technique allowing determination of the sedan's turning direction based on how the taillight glows swept across the ground. The results showed the vehicle did not turn right toward the east exit, as the old team had guessed, but turned left southbound immediately after passing the end of the parking row. This conclusion confirmed Rhodes's movement model, but, more importantly, the turn direction allowed the 33 vehicle list to be filtered again, based on owners' residence locations or frequent activities. In the next video restoration step, the tech team uncovered another small but extremely critical detail, a faint, bright patch below the rear bumper, about 6–8 inches long, possibly reflection from a silver decal or metal scratch. This was not a license plate identification, but a rare enough feature to add a new filter layer of the 33 narrowed vehicles. Only 3 had records of rear bumper repairs in 2004. 2006 per local garage maintenance logs. For the first time since 2005, the number of suspect vehicles dropped to a directly investigable level. Rhodes reviewed the report once more and noted in his notebook, 3333-2005 video technology could not see this. But he did not stop there. He continued requesting restoration of the 10 seconds before and after the sedan appeared, to check for any human shadows or unusual movement near Hannah's car. The results were unclear, but after enhancing brightness and noise correction, the tech team noted a fleeting human shadow near light pole number 4. The exact area a witness had described seeing a man smoking. The figure was just a dark mass with no facial details, but the shadow's movement speed on the ground indicated he left the position only seconds before the suspect's sedan engaged reverse lights. This reinforced the argument that the shadow and the sedan were directly related, a connection prior investigators could not prove. When Rhodes compiled all the new progress, the vehicle list reduced from 124 to 33, then to 3 with bumper repairs, sedan model identification, precise movement direction, and timing alignment with the mysterious shadow. He knew the investigation had entered an entirely different phase. No longer vague guesses based on blurry video, but now a real suspect list that could be reached, checked, cross-referenced, and eliminated. The new technology did not provide a perfect view, but it opened a door that had been locked for 6 years. For the first time, the cold case team felt real movement beneath the thick ice of the case. The perpetrator was no longer an invisible shadow in the night, but had shrunk to a number 3 vehicles, 3 people, 3 stories to be unearthed from the winter past of 2005, where silence covered everything but could not hide it forever. Among the 3 remaining names after narrowing down the list through video recovery, Rhodes began cross-referencing DMV records, 2005 residential addresses, vehicle ownership history, and all related data that the state system could provide. The first two names quickly revealed clear disqualifying factors. One had moved out of Missouri a few months before Hannah's disappearance, while the second had a record of rear bumper repair in 2004, but it belonged to a family with 3 shared vehicles, confirmed to have been used by others on the night of December 20th. Only one person met all the criteria: Elliot Hawthorne, 33 years old at the time of Hannah's disappearance, residing in a southern suburban neighborhood of Columbia, just an 8-minute drive from Columbia Mall, along the route that video analysis had identified as the departure path of the dark sedan from the parking lot. DMV records showed that Elliot had owned a 2002 Chevrolet Malibu in dark blue, one of the models matching the silhouette description identified by the enhanced video analysis team. More importantly, the Malibu had been recorded as having rear bumper repair in January 2006, just a few weeks after Hannah's disappearance, according to a receipt from a small garage in the southern suburbs. Rhodes circled that detail in red, because among the 3 vehicles discovered with rear bumper repairs during that period, only Elliot's Malibu matched the model, the geographic proximity, and the departure direction reconstructed from the perimeter cameras. Digging deeper, Rhodes found a notable point: Elliot had no history of violent crime, but he had been cautioned for stalking a female employee at his workplace in 2003, though no charges were filed because the victim did not want to escalate the matter. In old personnel files that Rhodes accessed through administrative support, the manager at the time described Elliot as quiet, unpredictable, and sometimes appearing in places where he had no legitimate reason to be. This was not evidence of a crime, but it created a psychological profile fitting the opportunistic offender model that the FBI had outlined: someone with limited social interaction, a tendency to observe others without drawing attention, and prone to being triggered into action under favorable circumstances. As Rhodes continued reviewing Elliot's location and activity data from the night of Hannah's disappearance, he realized that the 2005 records contained no notes related to this man. The original investigation team had never interviewed Elliot because the Malibu was not on the suspect model list at the time. This made Elliot a major blind spot in the case, an untouched void. When Rhodes cross-checked Elliot's alibi, he became even more attentive. In 2005, Elliot had told police in an unrelated matter that he was home alone on the evening of December 20th. When the 2011 cold case team followed up to verify if anyone could confirm that, Elliot's family stated they were not with him that night and could not confirm Elliot was home. This was not evidence of guilt, but neither was it an alibi. No one could confirm where Elliot had been between the time Hannah was last seen and when the camera captured the sedan leaving the parking lot. Rhodes reviewed all the BOU notes. The offender typically lived near the mall area, operated within a 10-15 minute radius, owned a common personal vehicle, exhibited discreet behavior, and left no strong traces. Elliot matched every criterion. His cautious nature made Rhodes reluctant to rush, but the more data he gathered, the more Elliot stood out among the 3 remaining names as an anomaly that could not be ignored. Residence 8 minutes from the incident, vehicle matching the model, rear bumper repair at the suspicious time, no alibi and personality fitting the behavioral profile, all placed Elliot at the center. By the end of the 3rd day of review, Rhodes wrote a short but pivotal line: Elliot Hawthorne, primary POI. Need to dig deep into full movement history, background, and vehicle. This was the first time since the winter night of 2005 that the Hannah case had a real name. One not just appearing in statistics, but standing at the intersection of every logical data point the investigation had rebuilt from scratch. Rhodes decided to approach Elliot Hawthorne with a preliminary interview, framed as information verification rather than direct investigation, to avoid making the suspect feel cornered and withdraw right from the start. One late April afternoon in 2011, he and a young investigator knocked on the door of Elliot's house in the southern suburbs of Columbia, where residency records showed he still lived alone in the home he had rented since 2004. Elliot opened the door after a few seconds of hesitation, appearing thin with dark circles under his eyes, but showing no signs of fear. Rhodes introduced them gently, explaining that they were reviewing some old records related to activity at Columbia Mall in December 2005 and wanted to ask him a few questions. Elliot nodded, stepped aside to let them in, his demeanor neither overly defensive nor comfortable. As they sat down at the small dining table by the window, Rhodes started with harmless questions: where he worked in 2005, who he lived with, whether he frequented the mall. Elliot answered briefly, sometimes hesitating, but without showing irritation. Only when Rhodes moved to the key question, where were you on the night of December 20th, 2005, did Elliot look up slightly, blink once, and reply, I was home, alone, all evening. Rhodes followed up, do you remember what time you got home? Did anyone see you there? Did you call anyone? Elliot shook his head. I didn't leave the house that night. I didn't see anyone. I didn't call anyone. I don't remember the exact times, but I'm sure I didn't go anywhere. The response was too perfect to verify, but lacked any accompanying physical evidence, prompting Rhodes to immediately flag it in red in his notebook. This was exactly the kind of empty alibi the FBI had described, impossible to disprove, but equally impossible to confirm. Someone living alone could claim at home for any evening, especially after 6 years had passed. Rhodes deliberately shifted direction, asking about the 2002 Chevrolet Malibu Elliot had owned. Elliot looked toward the window, even before Rhodes mentioned the rear bumper repair in 2006. He said he had sold the car long ago, didn't remember who bought it, and the repair was just a minor fender bender in a Walmart parking lot. Rhodes asked for details about when the collision happened and whether there was an insurance report. Elliot immediately changed the subject, saying the small garage didn't do paperwork, just a quick fix because it wasn't worth claiming insurance. That response drew even more attention from Rhodes, as the garage record showed the repair date in January 2006, a time too close to Hannah's disappearance to be pure coincidence. When asked if he had ever met Hannah or recognized her name, Elliot firmly denied it, his voice unusually quick. I don't know her. I don't know anything about that. You're asking the wrong person. Rhodes observed every reaction. Elliot showed no anger or panic. He just tried to keep his voice steady, his eyes sometimes meeting theirs, sometimes drifting to his sleeve, a sign of someone trying to control every word. The interview lasted over 25 minutes and yielded no answers with real legal value, but it provided Rhodes with a set of suspicious signals, enough to view Elliot as a true POI, but not enough to obtain a search warrant or compulsory DNA sample. At the end, Rhodes stood up, thanked Elliot for his cooperation, deliberately keeping his tone neutral to avoid alerting him too soon. Elliot showed them to the door without asking anything further, only saying one short sentence. I hope you find the person who really did it. That attempt to appear innocent only made Rhodes notice the unnaturalness in Elliot's behavior even more. There were too many matches between him and the opportunistic offender description, but Elliot revealed no exploitable slip. As they left the neighborhood, the young investigator asked Rhodes. He seemed a bit off, but he didn't make any obvious mistakes. Rhodes simply replied, exactly, and that's the problem. He knew that pushing harder would cause Elliot to clam up immediately. Investigating too slowly might let potential leads go cold. Therefore, he decided to pause the direct approach and place all hopes on forensics, because only scientific evidence could break through the facade Elliot was holding so tightly. Rhodes closed his notebook, writing the final line. Elliot, suspicious, but evidence must speak. Withdraw temporarily, await forensics. In late 2011, just as Rhodes had pulled back from interviewing Elliot to wait for a scientific breakthrough, the Missouri Forensic Laboratory announced news that immediately brought the entire cold case team back to their desks. The lab had just implemented a new version of mixture DNA separation technology using trace signal decomposition algorithms, a method capable of recovering weak components in touch DNA samples that 2005 technology had been completely unable to handle. Rhodes immediately requested priority reprocessing of all samples stored in case 0512MW, especially the 3 locations with high probability mixed DNA likely from the perpetrator's hands: the inner driver's door edge, the exterior door handle, and the vinyl strip near the dashboard. The new mixture separation process used peak deconvolution techniques combined with specialized statistical modeling for extremely low signal samples, allowing the untangling of overlapping signal points previously classified as unanalyzable. The forensic team worked nearly 10 straight days, not only because the samples were so weak, but also because they had to run multiple trials to ensure no false profiles were created from background noise. On the 11th day, they sent Rhodes an email with a short but heart-pounding subject line: "We have isolated a partial male contributor. For the first time since December 20, 2005, the case had an isolated male DNA fragment, no longer fully mixed with Hannah's DNA or unrelated sources." Though it was only a partial profile, an incomplete record with about 9 stable markers, it was still stronger than any scientific evidence the team had ever had. Rhodes went to the lab that same afternoon. The technician explained that in the 3-source DNA mixture, the third source, suspected to be the perpetrator, had allele values outside the sets from Hannah and family reference samples, meaning it could not be indirect transfer through object contact. This strongly reinforced the likelihood that this was the biological trace of the person who had touched Hannah's car on the night she vanished. Rhodes requested immediate entry of this profile into CODIS. Though he knew partial profiles often had low match rates, he hoped that even a few matching markers with someone sampled after 2005 could open a completely new direction. The lab submitted the data to state-level CODIS, which automatically forwarded it to the federal database for nationwide matches. 3 days later, the results came back. No CODIS hit, no matches with anyone. Not in Missouri, not federally, not in violent or nonviolent offender records, not in the list of those previously detained and sampled. The printed report had only one cold conclusion line: unknown male contributor, no associated identity. For many younger investigators, a no-match result often ended hope at the forensic stage. But Rhodes looked at the report, not with disappointment, but with clarity. No CODIS hit did not mean the DNA was useless. It only meant the person had never been sampled, never convicted of a felony, or their record was outside the database scope at that time. More importantly, this partial male profile was clean enough not to be confused with background, meaning it could be used as input for a new technique Rhodes had read about in recent federal reports. Forensic genealogy, genetic genealogy searching. This tool had been tested in a few cases nationwide, but was still very new and controversial in 2011. However, in cases with no body, no witnesses, and only a weak DNA trace like Hannah's, genealogy might be the only path. Rhodes requested sending the profile to a federal consulting organization's genetic genealogy linkage unit that collaborated with small police departments. The lab was initially cautious. Partial profiles sometimes lacked enough data to build a family tree, and they needed at least 12 stable markers to ensure the algorithm didn't produce false results. But after re-examining the data, they confirmed they could incorporate some weak alleles as probabilistic markers, raising the total to 11, just low enough for high risk, but enough to try if no other path existed. Rhodes understood this clearly. Genealogical matching was not magic. It required hundreds of hours building family trees, tracing distant relatives, and identifying genetic directions through multi-generational branches. But he also knew they had no body, no secondary scene, no crime evidence, no weapon, and no valuable statements. Only DNA, a trace so thin it seemed meaningless in 2005. Now, thanks to 2011 technology, it had become the only key to a new direction. After an internal meeting, Rhodes wrote a short report: male DNA partial profile extracted, unmatched in CODIS. Genealogy recommended. As he placed the paper in the file, that simple sound was almost like the case reviving, as if 6 years of ice had just cracked a long fissure on the surface. No one in the room said it aloud, But everyone understood the Hannah Whitford case had just stepped from darkness into a new light. Not strong light, just a thin ray, but enough to lead them to a path no one could pursue before 2011. And like every cold case revived by forensics, the next journey would no longer rely on memories, statements, or guesses, but on invisible numeric chains hidden within the genome of a man who had never appeared in legal records, yet left the smallest trace on Hannah's car on that fateful winter night in 2005. In 2014, after nearly 3 years with the Hannah Whitford file transferred to the cold case team with a new investigative direction based on the male DNA isolated in 2011, Rhodes received notification from the forensic lab that several commercial genealogy databases had begun allowing limited law enforcement access for serious crime investigations. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, because the partial profile from Hannah's car door handle, though not complete enough for direct identification, had enough necessary markers to build a broad-level genetic genealogy analysis. Rhodes requested transferring the data to the state's Forensic Genealogy Support Unit, where a small team of experts, mostly civilian genealogists under contract, was handling similar cold cases across the Midwest. After extensive legal procedures to ensure the case met serious violent crime standards, the male DNA profile was anonymized and uploaded to GED Match, an online genealogy platform where hundreds of thousands of users voluntarily uploaded their genetic data to find distant relatives or research ancestry. Because the perpetrator's profile was partial, the system could not generate strong matches. Instead, it returned a long list of individuals with very distant genetic relations, sharing only 20-40 centimorgans, equivalent to fourth, fifth, or even more distant cousins. In most cases, such weak results would be nearly useless. But for Rhodes, having any matches at all was progress unimaginable 6 years earlier. The genealogy team began the most laborious work, building family trees from those distant matches, finding intersections between lineages, and seeing if they could trace backward through branches to find a closer relative in the present generation. The work dragged on for months, involving hundreds of names cross-checked through census records, residency registrations, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and even vague old social media information. Most family branches led to dead ends. Some lineages had migrated out of Missouri over a century ago. Some had too many descendants across generations, making it extremely difficult to identify who fit the suspect's age range. But in late 2014, one distant genealogy branch, originating from two individuals matching at only 28 and 31 centimorgans, unexpectedly intersected at a specific surname, Hawthorne, a family with roots in the Midwest since the early 20th century, and many members living in Missouri across generations. When the genealogy team reconstructed the diagram, they saw that the two distant matches both connected to a couple from the 1930s generation. From them, the family tree branched out to over 30 descendants, including one line extending to Columbia and Jefferson City in the 1970s. Rhodes was notified immediately when Hawthorne appeared. Though not yet evidence, he instantly connected it to the name that had lingered in his mind throughout the reinvestigation. Elliot Hawthorne, the man living 8 minutes from Columbia Mall, who owned a matching sedan, had suspicious rear bumper repair timing, no alibi, and a recorded history of stalking women. The genealogy team continued narrowing the Hawthorne branch by cross-referencing gender, age, and residency of members during 2005. Only 3 fit. One had lived in Illinois at the time of the crime, the second died in 2009, and the third, Elliot. Genealogy data showed Elliot was a distant relative of the two GED matches, possibly several generations removed as a cousin, but enough for the system to detect the genetic link. That was the hallmark of genealogy, not finding the person directly, but intersections in the gene pool pointing to a specific family branch. When Rhodes viewed the complete family tree, he knew this was no longer coincidence. A person fitting the FBI behavioral description, living near the key area, owning a matching vehicle model, with repairs at the suspicious time, no alibi, recorded stalking behavior toward women, and now appearing in the exact genealogy branch linked to the partial DNA profile, all converging on one name. The genealogy unit sent its final report to Rhodes in early 2015. In the report, they clearly stated, based on shared centimorgan values, cluster grouping, generational mapping, and geographic consistency, the most probable candidate within the Hawthorne lineage is Elliot Hawthorne. Rhodes sat silently before the report page for a long time. The Hannah Whitford case had once been like a forgotten blank page in the dark for nearly a decade. Now, from just a tiny DNA trace that seemed useless, they had traced all the way to the family branch the perpetrator belonged to. Elliot was no longer just a reasonable suspicion, he had become the convergence point of every investigative direction, from behavior to location, from vehicle to genealogy. When Rhodes wrote the final line in the memo, Elliot Hawthorne, central suspect, he knew the case had entered a completely different phase, no longer a hopeless cold case, no longer nameless darkness. For the first time, they had a direct, if fragile but undeniable, path from DNA to the man who likely knew exactly what happened to Hannah Whitford on that winter night in 2005. Right after the genealogy report identified Elliot Hawthorne as the central suspect, Rhodes knew that every next step had to be absolutely discreet. Directly confronting Elliot at this point would only make him wary, change his habits, or even destroy any items that might carry DNA traces. Instead, he deployed a cautious surveillance plan lasting several weeks, aimed at observing his daily routines, travel times, and the places Elliot frequented, locations where he might inadvertently leave biological samples. Rhodes formed a three-person team, rotating shifts to follow Elliot from 6 a.m. to midnight, avoiding any direct contact so the suspect wouldn't realize he was being watched. Elliot still worked at a small garage on the outskirts, as previous records had indicated. Every morning, he left home around 7:45, driving an old pickup truck, the vehicle that had replaced the Malibu he owned in 2005, taking the exact same route to work. His gait was steady, slightly stooped, with short steps, matching the reserved demeanor Rhodes had observed during the interrogation. During the first week, the surveillance team noted no unusual behavior. Elliot worked 8 hours, ate fast food for lunch, and didn't interact much with coworkers. In the evenings, he went home, sometimes stopping at a nearby store for groceries, then stayed indoors until the next morning. But that very regularity was what made Rhodes wary. Opportunistic offenders often maintain a normal life for years, showing no signs of guilt in their daily behavior. The next task was to collect Elliot's DNA without a warrant, possible only if the subject abandoned biological material in a public place. Rhodes knew Elliot rarely discarded items carelessly, but he spotted an opportunity. Every Thursday after work, Elliot stopped at the same fast food restaurant on South Providence Road, bought a soda and sandwich, and sat for about 15 minutes before heading home. This was a rare chance to obtain a sample without raising suspicion. The plan was executed in the third week. One team member sat at the table behind Elliot, noting every movement. Elliot drank his soda through a straw, occasionally setting the cup down, showing no signs of wariness or scanning the surroundings. When he stood to leave, carrying his trash tray, Rhodes worried he might keep the cup, but like most customers, Elliot dumped everything into the trash bin by the door without a second glance. Outside, Rhodes said briefly over the radio, "Wait 30 seconds, then retreat." The surveillance member waited until the fast food staff moved away from the trash area, then approached like a regular customer discarding a napkin, discreetly taking Elliot's cup, wrapped in a paper bag to avoid notice. The straw was still inside, dry on the top, but certain to retain oral cells inside. The evidence was taken straight to the surveillance vehicle, double-sealed, and delivered to the Boone County Forensics Lab in under 40 minutes. Rhodes monitored the entire process without taking his eyes off the report in his hand, which stated, "For comparison, a clean DNA sample is needed, no contamination and sufficient markers." He knew that the straw sample, if of good quality, would allow direct comparison with the partial male profile extracted in 2011. The only missing step to determine if Elliot was truly involved in the case, or just a coincidental name in the genealogy tree. In the following days, surveillance continued. Elliot lived normally, going to work on time, with no unusual changes despite having unwittingly left a DNA sample. Rhodes saw this as a good sign. He didn't know what was happening and had no reason to be on guard. On the Thursday evening after submitting the sample, the forensics lab sent a notification, straw sample processed, proceeding with marker comparison to partial profile. Rhodes felt a weight pressing on his chest, not from anxiety, but because the moment they had waited for since 2005 was finally here. If the alleles matched, there would be no doubt that Elliot was the person who had touched Hannah's car on the night she disappeared. And if they didn't match, they would have to start over, even though the coincidences of vehicle, location, and genealogy branch were hard to explain in any innocent scenario. He closed the file, looking through the surveillance vehicle window as Elliot entered his house, the low porch light casting shadows on his expressionless face. Rhodes didn't know what the forensic results would say, but he knew one thing: the investigation had reached the point where there was no choice but to let the DNA answer. 3 days after the DNA sample collected from the straw at the fast food restaurant was delivered to the forensics lab, Rhodes received the call that had never come in nearly a decade of investigation. "We have the comparison results." He immediately went to the Boone County lab, where the technician was waiting with 2 reports side by side. One, the partial male profile extracted from Hannah's car in 2011. The other, a clean profile from Elliot Hawthorne's oral cells. On the computer screen, the marker bands appeared line by line, each allele a column of data that Rhodes had seen hundreds of times in other cases, but never with the feeling he had now. The technician pointed to each locus: D3S1358. Match, VWA, match, D16S539, match, D8S1179, match, D21S11, match, D18S51, match, D5S818, match, FGA, match. All the markers present in the partial profile, few, faint, and once considered insufficient to find the perpetrator, now reappeared in Elliot's DNA sample with a statistical match that was nearly absolute. When the technician read the final conclusion, Pone in 2.4 quadrillion, Rhodes felt a deep silence descend on the room, as if the air itself paused to mark the moment when the Hannah Whitford case finally emerged from the shadows. The probability of any random person sharing this allele combination with the sample from Hannah's car was so low, it couldn't occur in the entire human population. In other words, Elliot Hawthorne was the individual who had left biological traces on Hannah's car the night she vanished. Rhodes needed further confirmation. Is there any chance the sample was contaminated or mixed during collection? The technician shook his head. No, the markers are too distinctive, and the straw sample was completely clean, undegraded. The matches are at a level that can't be explained by indirect contact. This is a direct match. This was formalized into an official forensic report the same day, stamped by the lab director and an independent expert. With that result, the genealogical mapping algorithm was no longer remote inference. Elliot matching the partial DNA confirmed that the 2015 family tree had led them to the right person. It also meant the answer to the question that had lingered for nearly 10 years, who touched Hannah's car, now had a specific, undeniable name. Rhodes gathered all the documents: DNA results, genealogy report, video report, vehicle history, and behavioral analysis. He organized them in legal sequence, preparing the file to submit to the Boone County prosecutor for an arrest warrant on charges of first-degree kidnapping and second-degree murder under Missouri law. Even though Hannah's body had not been found, state law allowed prosecution if physical and circumstantial evidence sufficiently established that the crime occurred and the victim had no chance of survival. The prosecutor read the file in silence for nearly an hour. When reaching the DNA match section, she paused for a long time, then asked Rhodes only one question: "Are you certain this is the person who contacted the victim the night she disappeared?" Rhodes replied. I am. And science says the same. She signed the warrant application that evening. The file was sent to the district judge, who, after reviewing all evidence, approved the warrant immediately, noting probable cause established beyond reasonable doubt for arrest. By then, it was dark, city lights reflecting on the wet roads after a light rain. Rhodes stepped out of the building, still clutching a copy of the warrant in his coat pocket. He looked toward South Columbia, where Elliot had lived for years after Hannah disappeared, calmly going about a life that seemed to leave no trace. But the trace was still there, too small for the naked eye, and it had taken nearly a decade of advancing technology to extract it from the silence. When the task force assembled the next morning to plan the arrest, Rhodes said only one thing, his voice low and steady: "We have the strongest evidence. It's time to bring Hannah to where she belongs. The truth." And with the warrant in hand, the missing person case that had dragged on for nearly 10 years finally entered the phase where the truth was no longer a shadow, but a concrete form named Elliot Hawthorne. Before dawn the next day, while mist still clung white to the rooftops of the Green Meadows neighborhood, and the quiet streets of South Columbia had yet to wake, the Boone County SWAT team and Rhodes' investigation group secretly approached the house where Elliot Hawthorne had lived for over a decade in suspicious tranquility. Elliot usually left home at 6:45 a.m. for his job at the suburban auto shop, but surveillance logs showed he always spent about 20 minutes in the garage beforehand, a routine so consistent it became a tactical weakness. At 5:58 a.m., Rhodes received the green signal from the scout team. Elliot had turned on the garage light, casting shadows on the oil-stained concrete floor as usual. Seconds later, SWAT surged in synchronized, the garage door bursting open under the breaching charge, the metallic clang echoing coldly in the chilly morning. Elliot jerked around, hands still greasy with engine oil, eyes wide at the rapid commands. Elliot Hawthorne, Boone County Sheriff's Department. Do not move. He was taken down to the floor in 3 seconds, cuffs snapping on his wrists before he could process what was happening. Rhodes entered right after, presenting the valid arrest warrant and reading the suspect his rights. Elliot didn't react much, only repeatedly asking, "What's going on? What did I do?" But his voice wasn't panicked, more like someone trying to hide what he knew was the end. As Elliot was escorted to the vehicle, the rapid search team conducted a sweep of the garage under the temporary search warrant attached to the arrest. On the wooden workbench next to the tool rack, they seized a folding knife with a worn steel blade, a coil of gray paracord, and especially a thick, charcoal-colored jacket that had been washed many times but still had a few dark stains near the cuffs. Stains Rhodes immediately ordered, sealed for testing. In the corner of the garage, next to the sedan Elliot currently drove, technicians found an old cardboard box with parts and shop rags. One rag had faint dried brown streaks, though it couldn't yet be confirmed as blood or oil. Rhodes ordered everything collected. Additionally, a small nylon bag containing long hair strands, not matching Elliot's hair color, made the whole team pause for a few seconds. Everything was sealed immediately. Elliot was loaded into the transport vehicle, head lowered per procedure, to protect both suspect and officers, but his eyes briefly met Rhodes as the door closed. A look mixing helplessness, recognition of the undeniable, and a deep fear he couldn't hide in time. The convoy left the neighborhood at 6:27 a.m., no lights flashing to avoid attention. Columbia remained quiet under the thin mist, unaware that a case dormant for 12 years had awakened in just moments. At the Boone County Sheriff's Office, processing Elliot proceeded in tense silence. Security check, removal of personal items, transfer to the camera-equipped interrogation room. Rhodes stood outside, observing through the one-way glass, hand on the thick file containing the DNA match, genealogy, enhanced video, and surveillance reports. Elliot sat motionless, only shaking his head slightly, as if still trying to convince himself the arrest was some mistake. But Rhodes knew better. From the moment the DNA matched, mistakes no longer existed. They had found the person they needed, and now it was time to hear the story from Elliot Hawthorne himself. if he was willing to tell it. In the harshly lit interrogation room, Elliot sat slightly hunched, hands clasped, as if trying to keep his breathing steady, but small movements, fingers tapping lightly, jaw clenching and releasing, didn't escape Rhodes. As he entered and placed the statement form on the table, Rhodes began in a low, calm voice, not aggressive, but heavy enough to carry weight. "Elliot, you know why you're here." Elliot immediately shook his head, a bit too quickly for an innocent person. "I don't know anything. I don't know who Hannah is. I've never met her." Rhodes didn't rebut right away. This was the part he expected. He sat across from Elliot, placed a pen on the table, twirling it lightly with his fingertip, as if this were just a normal conversation. "I'm not saying you met her. I just want to understand your schedule on the evening of December 20th, 2005. Elliot looked away, trying to stay calm. "I already told you. I was home alone, like I told you guys back then." Rhodes watched closely for every twitch at the corner of his eyes, signs of someone reconstructing an old, memorized story. "Can you go into more detail from around 6 p.m. onward?" Elliot swallowed. I was working on my car in the garage. Then I went inside and watched TV. I went to bed early." "Alone?" Rhodes repeated, voice unchanged. "Yes. No one was there." Rhodes nodded, as if noting useful information. In reality, he knew this alibi had been ruled out in 2005, but what he wanted was to see how Elliot retold it after 12 years, accuracy, variations, fabrication potential. "Did you leave the house at all?" Elliot answered immediately. "No. Too quick, too certain for an ordinary night, with nothing special." Rhodes tilted his head, pretending to flip a note page, while Elliot glanced down at his hands as if hiding something. "Elliot," Rhodes said slowly, "we have some new data. Technology is much better now. Things we can see more clearly than in 2005. Elliot looked up, but Rhodes didn't elaborate. He let the statement hang, like an invisible hook the suspect didn't know whether to grab. "What data?" Elliot asked quietly, trying to sound neutral, but with a slight tremble. Rhodes didn't answer directly. He shifted to another angle, a tactic to play on the fear of someone who sees himself as innocent, but doesn't know what police have. "Elliot, I've reviewed your file. No prior record. You live quietly. Regular job. Low profile. That's usually good. Unless someone uses that quiet to hide big mistakes." Elliot narrowed his eyes, defensive. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Rhodes replied, "it's rare for a completely ordinary person to appear in the investigation radius of a serious disappearance without a reason." Elliot took a deep breath. "I told you, I'm not involved. I don't know that girl." Rhodes leaned back, arms crossed, not pressing directly. "You know, most people who commit crimes in parking lots say that. Some say it until the fourth time. Some say it until they see the evidence." Elliot started shifting constantly, signs of rising anxiety. But Rhodes still hadn't mentioned the DNA. He held it as the final card, the one that would shatter Elliot's defenses if played at the right moment. "I'll ask again, and you have time to tell the truth." Rhodes' voice lowered, firmer. "That night, December 20th, 2005, did you leave the house?" Elliot stared down for 3 unusually long seconds, then whispered, "No." Rhodes noted the answer without comment. He stood, gathered the papers, signaling the end of the first interrogation phase. "Elliot, we'll talk more. But I want you to understand, everything you say today will be checked, and lies never last long in a room like this." As Rhodes stepped out, leaving Elliot alone under the cold lights, the suspect clung to his denial, unaware that his fatal weakness, the absolute DNA match, hadn't been revealed yet. The real confrontation had only just begun. When the interrogation room door opened for the second time that afternoon, Elliot looked up with tension he could no longer hide. Dark circles from hours alone under the white lights had shifted him to a defensive alertness. Rhodes entered calmly, carrying a thinner file than before, but that very compactness unsettled Elliot, because the most important things often don't need much paper. Rhodes sat down, not opening the file immediately, but placing his hands together in front of him, staring at Elliot long enough that he had to look away. "I've reviewed your statement from this morning," Rhodes began, voice objective, not threatening but sharp like a surgical blade. "There are a few points we need to clarify." Elliot swallowed. "I told the truth." "Good," Rhodes nodded. "Then you won't mind if we go back over the timeline for the evening of December 20th, 2005, Elliot breathed faster. "A sign," Rhodes noted. "You said you were working on your car from 6 to about 8. Right. Yes. And no one can confirm that." "Yes. Then you said you went inside and watched TV from 8 to 10. Elliot nodded stiffly. Rhodes tilted his head. "What program?" Elliot blinked. "This time longer. I don't remember. It's been 12 years. Strange thing is," Rhodes continued, voice steady like hammer strikes on steel, "this morning you said, I went to bed early. But in your 2005 statement, you said you stayed up until 11. Elliot froze. Clearly, he hadn't expected Rhodes to dig into every line of the old file. Rhodes slid a photocopy across to the suspect. "This is your signature. This is your statement. Tonight you say one thing. Back then you said another. So which is it?" Elliot stared at the paper, lips pressed tight. "I don't remember exactly. It's been too long." Rhodes didn't raise his voice. He even lowered it. "Innocent people usually remember more accurately than those who've made mistakes. Innocent people don't have to keep adjusting their own timeline." Elliot started fidgeting. "You're trying to pressure me." "No," Rhodes said softly. "I'm just comparing the truth to your statements. And the truth doesn't change after 12 years. But your statements keep changing," Rhodes continued. "You said you didn't leave the house. But traffic cameras on Stadium Boulevard recorded a dark sedan leaving your area at 9:58 p.m. that night." Elliot jolted, body tensing like a strung wire. "What cameras?" I don't know anything about that." Rhodes opened the file, pulling out 3 photos from the enhanced video. "This is the car." Elliot looked, face going pale. The images weren't sharp enough to identify the driver, but the body shape, taillight pattern, rear bumper angle, all matched the sedan Elliot owned in 2005. Rhodes turned the photos toward Elliot, not rushing. "You said you didn't leave the house that night, but your car did." Elliot breathed heavily. "Sounds like someone backed into a corner. It wasn't me driving. I don't remember. Maybe I went out for a bit. I'm not sure." Rhodes seized the waiver immediately. "Don't remember or don't want to say." "I'm not sure." Elliot raised his voice, hands starting to shake. Rhodes didn't emphasize the contradiction, instead asking something else entirely. "Did you know Hannah Whitford disappeared around 10 p.m.? Elliot stammered. I told you I don't know her." Rhodes held his gaze like a nail pinning the suspect to the chair. "Then it's quite a coincidence. Your car leaving home right around the time Hannah was approached in the Columbia Mall parking lot. A car identical to yours was recorded by mall cameras. And you can't explain why you lied about leaving the house." Elliot put his hands to his forehead, hunching slightly, as if the room's pressure was crushing his chest. I didn't want trouble. I just went out for a little while. I don't remember." Rhodes knew this was the timeline breaking, the key moment in any interrogation. "Elliot," he said slowly, "what we need is the truth. Everything you say gets verified. And the more you cling to a wrong story, the faster it collapses on its own." Elliot stopped answering, just breathing rapidly, eyes fixed on an invisible spot on the table. Rhodes stood, gathering the photos. "We'll continue later. You should use the time before I return to think about when you want to start telling the truth." Elliot remained motionless, but his face betrayed the truth clearly. The timeline he'd tried to hold for 12 years was crumbling right there, and he knew he couldn't hold it much longer. When Rhodes entered the interrogation room for the 3rd time, the air was thick, as if the 4 narrow walls were pressing Elliot toward the cold metal chair where he had sat motionless for nearly an hour. Elliot looked like he had aged 10 years in just that afternoon. Eyes sunken, hair limp and stuck to his sweat-damp forehead, hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. Rhodes carried no thick file, no photos, no notes. He simply placed a thin envelope on the table, sealed in red, with the bold letters, "Confidential." DNA match report. Elliot swallowed hard when he saw it, as if some instinct inside him knew this envelope marked the end of every lie, every fragment he had tried to hide for 12 years. Rhodes pulled out a chair and sat down, maintaining silence for so long that the hum of the ventilation fan felt like it was drilling straight into Elliot's ears. "Elliot," he said, his voice low and calm to the point of chilling, "I want to give you one last chance to say anything you need to say before I open this envelope." Elliot clenched his hands tighter. I don't know what you want anymore. I've already told you everything." Rhodes didn't respond. He just gently broke the seal, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and turned it toward Elliot. The line in the middle of the page struck like a blade into the fragile defense Elliot had tried to build. Probability of unrelated individual equals sign 1 in 2.4 quadrillion. Elliot read it once. His eyes widened. His lips trembled. Rhodes remained silent for a few more seconds before speaking. "This is the third DNA sample, a clean one, taken from the straw you used 2 weeks ago. No mistake, no contamination, no coincidence." Elliot shook his head, slowly at first, then more violently as if trying to erase reality itself. No, you don't understand. I didn't." Rhodes set the report down on the table and slid it toward Elliot like placing a heavy stone on his chest. "The DNA in Hannah's car matches yours perfectly. Not by chance, not from indirect contact, not a technical error. Elliot, you were in her car. You had contact with her." Elliot dropped his head, his shoulders shaking. Whether from crying or suppressing a scream, it wasn't clear. Rhodes knew this was the moment he broke. The moment the final DNA shattered whatever psychological barriers remained. "Do you want me to read the rest of the forensic expert's conclusion?" Rhodes asked, his voice soft, like a blade gliding over fabric before cutting deep into skin. Elliot breathed heavily. "No, don't read it." "Then tell me." Rhodes leaned forward. "What happened that night?" A silence so heavy fell that Rhodes could hear the wall clock ticking each second. Then Elliot whispered, thin as a thread, "I didn't mean to do it." Rhodes didn't react, staying perfectly still. Elliot covered his face with his hands, tears falling onto the table, mingling with the cold light reflected from the lamp. I just wanted to talk to her. I didn't know it would go that far." "How far did it go, Elliot?" Rhodes asked, his tone unchanged. Elliot gasped for air. "I saw her walking to the parking lot. She was alone. I approached her. I said a few things. She got scared. She tried to leave. I just wanted to calm her down." Rhodes stared straight at him. "And then?" Elliot forced out words as if each one was cutting his throat. "She pulled away from me. I pulled her into the car. I just wanted to stop her from screaming." Rhodes placed both hands on the table, stiffening. "Where did you take her?" Elliot clutched his head, shaking violently. "I didn't know what to do. I drove, just drove. Then I ended up on the road by the river, the deserted spot. I didn't mean to kill her. I swear." Rhodes asked sharply, "Elliot Hawthorne, where is Hannah Whitford's body?" The question rang out like the final hammer blow on Elliot's crumbling mind. For the first time since his arrest, he didn't resist, didn't defend himself, didn't build another lie. Elliot lowered his hands from his face, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the table. His voice cracked. Easley River Access, the low ground near the turnoff to the trail. I buried her there." Rhodes held his breath for a few seconds, confirming whether Elliot had truly said those words or if it was just a panicked outburst. But Elliot didn't look up, didn't deny it, didn't search for an escape. He just repeated, almost pleading, "She's there. I know you'll find her. I'm sorry. Though the interrogation room was already cold, Elliot was now drenched in sweat, as if the confession had drained every ounce of strength he had carried through 12 years of hiding. Rhodes stood up, walking slowly around the table, his eyes never leaving Elliot. And then he said the words he had hoped for years to one day utter. "Elliot, your statement will be recorded in full. But you need to understand, telling us where Hannah's body is buried is the first step toward bringing her back to the truth. Elliot didn't reply, just nodded weakly. His hands limp at his sides, the last of his resistance completely shattered. For Rhodes, after 12 years of interrupted investigation, frustration, dead ends, and unwavering persistence, this was the first time the Hannah Whitford case had a real answer. Not a hypothesis, not speculation, not rumor, but the truth spoken by the very person who had tried to bury it under the damp, cold soil by the Missouri River on a winter night. And in the moment, Elliot uttered Easley River Access, the missing person case that had dragged on for over a decade, finally found a direction it had never had before. It was not yet fully light when the Boone County Specialized Vehicles stopped at the entrance to Easley River Access, where the dirt road leading down to the low riverbank area along the Missouri River was still shrouded in thick fog, like a veil concealing the truth that had lain dormant for 12 years. Elliot's confession was translated into approximate coordinates on the map, pinpointing an area of nearly 300 square meters along the turnoff to the old fishing trail, a desolate spot that hikers often avoided due to unstable ground and dense brush. Rhodes stepped out of the lead vehicle first, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft, damp soil left over from rain 2 days earlier. Beside him, the forensic team, main staff, special search unit, and 2 forensic archaeology technicians from the University of Missouri had arrived early to set up the excavation grid. They strung lines, staked posts, and divided the area into small marked squares with neon flags to ensure every digging step was precise and did not disrupt the stratigraphic structure, something that would determine the reliability of evidence later. Rhodes observed the entire scene with a heaviness settling in his chest. After more than a decade when Hannah had existed only in photos, files, and theories, they were now standing exactly where she had been hidden from the world. At 7:14 a.m., the K9 unit was released to scent along the edge of the tall grass. Within minutes, both cadaver dogs reacted the same way, stopping less than 10 meters from the riverbank, barking to alert, then sitting down, noses pointed directly at a small mound of earth that looked completely ordinary to the untrained eye. The forensic technicians conducted a surface check. The soil was looser than the surrounding area, the grass cover uneven, classic signs of a spot that had once been dug and refilled. Rhodes signaled to begin excavation. The archaeology team used small trowels and soft brushes, removing thin layers as if touching a fragile story. The first 10 minutes were completely silent, except for the scraping sound of soil, until one technician stopped and signaled, "I've got something." Everyone slowed immediately. A corner of dark fabric caked in mud emerged, compressed between 2 tight layers of soil. They expanded the surrounding area and recognized it as the remaining part of the jacket Hannah had worn the night she disappeared. The jacket described in the 2005 report, but never found. As the next layer of soil was brushed aside, a small phalange bone appeared, so fragile that without focused lighting, it could have been mistaken for a root. The ME knelt down to examine it, his voice low but certain. Human bone. Age consistent, continue excavation. The atmosphere shifted entirely from that moment. Everyone understood they had reached the final remains Hannah had left for the world. Over the next nearly 2 hours, more parts of the skeleton were uncovered: forearm bones, pelvis, scattered ribs, a portion of the skull still clinging to black soil. The skeleton was fragmented, but intact enough to determine the original burial position, lying on its side, arms drawn forward, as if in a final defensive reflex. Alongside were artifacts that had retained their shape: the metal bracelet Hannah wore to the club party, broken fingernails with tear marks, fabric matching the jeans she wore, and especially 2 sections of gray paracord, matching the type Elliot kept in his garage, still wrapped around the neck and chest bones, proving restraint and control in her final moments. The forensic technicians bagged each item separately, labeling with QR codes to preserve chain of custody. They also collected soil samples directly adhering to the bones and clothing for microscopic analysis, the kind that could pinpoint the exact time the soil was last disturbed. corroborating Elliot's confession about the timing of the crime. Halfway through the target depth, they discovered the Columbia Mall rental cart key. Something Hannah had held for her friends to return after the party, now just a rusted piece of metal, but its position between soil layers made the evidence even stronger that the body had never been moved after burial. Rhodes stood a few steps away, not intruding on the work area, but watching each artifact lifted from the earth, like buried fragments of memory. When the final bag containing the skull portion was sealed, he knew they had everything needed to move to the forensic phase, comparing DNA from bone marrow to Hannah's profile, analyzing cuts or impact marks on bones, testing the paracord, and matching soil to shoes or items in Elliot's garage. A technician approached and said quietly, "We have enough to reconstruct the sequence. Everything matches." Rhodes nodded, his gaze lingering on the now deep pit cordoned off with yellow tape. He said nothing, just stood in silence for a long while before speaking. "Bring Hannah home." And on that frigid morning, for the first time since 2005, the Hannah Whitford missing person case had a real form, no longer hypotheses, no longer vague descriptions, but evidence, bones, personal items, all linked into an undeniable forensic chain, paving the way for the truth to emerge from the darkness where it had been buried for 12 years. In the Boone County Forensic Lab, where cold light shone down on spotless steel tables, the process of confirming the identity of the remains excavated from Easley River Access proceeded with absolute caution, as if every action carried the weight of 12 years of waiting. The sealed bags were opened in strict chain of custody order, each bone and item placed on separate trays for classification. The ME in charge, Dr. Carver, began with the most traditional and reliable method, dental record comparison. He positioned the jaw section still containing 5 teeth under a backlit magnifying glass, examining every groove, every wear pattern, every old filling. Hannah's 2004 dental records from the family clinic were displayed on the adjacent screen. Tooth 14 had a triangular silver filling. Tooth 18 was slightly misaligned inward. The left front tooth had a small chip from a sports injury in 8th grade. All those markers were present, perfectly matching the recovered jaw. "Complete match," Carver confirmed, his voice steady but dropping a notch, enough to show this was not just a routine procedure, but an official closure. After dental, the forensic team moved to skeletal analysis. The University of Missouri forensic archaeologist measured femur and arm bone lengths, comparing them to growth indicators for a 17-year-old female. Everything fell within allowable error margins, but 2 details made the conclusion even stronger. The characteristic pelvic curvature consistent with a nulliparous female, and a healed fracture on rib 7, matching a minor bike accident recorded in Hannah's 2002 medical file. "No possibility of mistake," she said, noting it in the report. For physical evidence, the team laid out the fabric fragments and accessories recovered from the scene on a side table, the metal bracelet Hannah wore to the party, a portion of the jacket zipper, and especially the Columbia Mall rental cart key. A unique item no one else could have possessed at that time. Though corroded after years in damp soil, the faint engraved code, CMR3, was still visible under UV light, matching the mall's list of keys, reported missing on December 21, 2005. The textile forensic technician examined clothing fibers under a microscope and concluded the dark blue and gray fibers recovered matched exactly the jeans and jacket Hannah wore in photos from the night she disappeared. But the most critical part was DNA. Even with dental and physical evidence establishing identity, modern protocol required molecular confirmation. A small sample from the femur marrow was extracted and run through STR analysis. The comparison to DNA from the family's retained toothbrush and hair from a keepsake box produced a result as unambiguous as possible. Maternal offspring match, 99.9998%. Rhodes stood in the observation room behind one-way glass. He heard each conclusion read out, each piece of evidence confirmed, each final piece of the story he had pursued since 2011 fitting together before his eyes, like a completed picture with no blurred patches. When Dr. Carver signed the final report and stamped it, identification confirmed, Hannah Whitford. The room fell silent for a few seconds, a silence not of sadness or shock, but of release from years submerged in doubt and darkness. After 12 years since the night Hannah vanished from the Columbia Mall parking lot, after hundreds of searches, thousands of hours of analysis, tens of thousands of pages of files, and countless discarded theories, for the first time, her name was entered into a report, not as missing or presumed, but as identified. No longer a shadow in a file, no longer an unfinished timeline. Hannah Whitford had finally been found. Based on the established chain of evidence from Elliot's final confession, forensic samples from Hannah's car, enhanced security footage, to the forensic archaeology results at Easley River Access. The investigation team reconstructed the full sequence of events on the night of December 20, 2005, for the first time achieving a seamless scientific account. No longer reliant on vague hypotheses, as in the early years when the case was frozen. Using a 3D spatial model of the West Columbia Mall parking lot in 2005, built from original blueprints, positions of dim lights, distances between rows of cars, and escape routes. Roads and the FBI behavioral analysis team identified the initial point of approach, the area where Hannah turned into the dimly lit section after leaving the party. Shoe scuff marks on the concrete, blurred by rain the next day, had lacked legal value at the time, but by cross-referencing Hannah's car position, camera angles, and witness descriptions of a man standing smoking near the shadows, the team confirmed Elliot had been there, waiting for an opportunity to approach a lone target. Forensic data from Hannah's car reinforced this scenario. The mixed DNA separated in 2011 showed Hannah's on the driver's seat, along with male DNA belonging to Elliot on the passenger door handle and seatbelt edge, positions consistent with pulling or pushing the victim inside. Gray and dark blue fabric fibers on the car mat matched the type Elliot wore in 2005 surveillance photos provided by his family. These 2 points align perfectly with Elliot's confession. He approached Hannah as she opened her car door. She panicked and tried to flee, and that was when Elliot pulled her into the vehicle before she could escape. Analysis of restraint mechanisms on the skeleton showed pre-mortem compression marks on the cervical and upper spinal bones, corresponding to Elliot using paracord to prevent Hannah from struggling free. The gray nylon fibers found around the neck and chest matched the type, structure, and degradation level of the roll found in Elliot's garage at arrest. This completely ruled out any possibility the victim went with the attacker willingly. From there, the team built a timeline model based on camera data. A dark sedan left the parking lot between 10:05 and 10:15 p.m., perfectly matching the time Hannah lost contact and consistent with the route Elliot described as driving aimlessly. Route mapping cross-referenced with 2005 traffic data showed the drive to Easley River Access took only 17 minutes, where Elliot confessed to taking Hannah. Sparse street lighting, virtually no cameras, and no nearby residents made the location ideal for an impulsive, unplanned criminal act. From forensics, they confirmed Hannah was still alive during the drive. Fresh fractures on some phalanges and forearm bones indicated struggle immediately before death, matching Elliot's description that she tried to break free. However, dual compression marks on the rib cage and neck showed sustained pressure caused Hannah to lose consciousness and die quickly, with no signs of prolonged suffering or torture, indicating this was not premeditated or driven by personal motive between the two. The FBI behavioral unit concluded this was an opportunistic attack, the type committed by a perpetrator unknown to the victim, with no prior stalking, only reacting when a suitable target appeared under favorable conditions. Elliot had no prior relationship, contact, or conflict with Hannah. They had never lived near each other, attended the same school, or worked together. All analysis ruled out personal motive. Elliot chose Hannah simply because she was the first person to walk into the dark area where he was standing. A completely random act that led to irreversible consequences. The final sequence was established. Elliot pulled Hannah into the car, restrained her with paracord, drove away from the mall before anyone could appear. He took her to the Easley Riverbank, where in a moment of panic and loss of control, he caused her death. Afterward, Elliot buried the body in the soft soil near the water, attempting to conceal it by covering with leaves and small rocks, traces clearly visible in the soil structure during excavation. With the alignment of forensics, spatial modeling, camera footage, and confession, Rhodes could finally conclude what the community had only whispered for 12 years. Hannah Whitford did not run away, did not know her attacker, did not meet anyone familiar. She was the victim of an opportunistic attack that occurred simply because she was in the wrong place at the exact moment a man was looking to fill the dark void within himself. The case, for the first time, had a complete sequence that could not be distorted by any other theory. The trial of Elliot Hawthorne in August 2017 took place at the Boone County Courthouse in an atmosphere of tension that enveloped everything from the hallways to the large courtroom, where every seat was filled with reporters, family members, and people who had followed the disappearance of Hannah Whitford for 12 years. The county prosecutor, Marcia Langdon, opened with a summary that was both sharp and deliberate, focusing on four main pillars of evidence: DNA, genealogical mapping, movement timeline, and a forensically corroborated confession. We will prove that Elliot Hawthorne was not only present in the parking lot where Hannah disappeared, but that his biological traces were on the victim's vehicle, on the physical evidence, and on the soil layer where she was buried. And we will prove that there is no innocent explanation that fits the entire chain of evidence. She said this with her hand resting on a black binder filled with meticulously indexed documents, as if each page carried the weight to dismantle whatever fragile remnants of the defendant's defense remained. The prosecution began with forensic DNA evidence. A large projection screen displayed a chart comparing alleles between the sample recovered from Hannah's vehicle and the sample obtained from Elliot's straw during the surveillance phase. The forensic expert explained that the match occurred at every marker present in the partial profile from 2011, and with a probability of less than 1 in 2.4 quadrillion. This statistic meant, on a scientific level, that no other person on Earth could coincidentally possess the same combination. The defense attorney argued that the DNA on the vehicle could have come from secondary transfer, but the prosecution immediately called a second expert on trace transfer, who demonstrated that the location of the DNA was in an area where secondary contact was impossible, and the adhesion level matched the pattern of forcibly moving the victim based on experimental models. Next came the genealogical DNA section, the point the defense clung to in an attempt to create reasonable doubt, which the prosecution presented carefully. It was not used to identify Elliot as the perpetrator, but to narrow down hundreds of vehicles to 20 and then to one central suspect, leading to the surveillance warrant and direct DNA collection. We did not arrest Elliot Hawthorne because of genealogical DNA, the prosecutor clarified. We arrested him because of his own DNA. Genealogy was just the map. The real evidence is the trace he left on the victim's vehicle. The defense objected strongly, claiming that the genealogical tool invaded privacy and was not yet standardized. However, the judge overruled the objection. After reviewing the record, genealogy was not used to identify the offender, but only to assist in narrowing the suspect pool. The direct evidence is the lawful DNA match obtained in public space. This collapsed one of Elliot's two main defense pillars. The prosecution continued with the timeline. They presented an enhanced video from the mall camera showing the silhouette of a dark-colored sedan leaving the parking lot between 10:05 and 10:15 p.m., exactly the window when Hannah disappeared. In parallel, traffic camera data recorded a similar vehicle leaving Elliot's neighborhood at 9:58 p.m. When they displayed the route map along with the travel time model, the entire sequence aligned perfectly. Elliot's vehicle left home, arrived at the mall, left the mall, and then headed straight to Easley River Access. the exact location Elliot confessed to taking Hannah. The defense tried to argue that the camera images were not clear enough to identify the vehicle and did not confirm the driver, but the prosecution countered that the cameras did not stand alone. They were simply the link connecting the DNA, the confession, and the forensics. When it came to physical evidence, the prosecution introduced the gray paracord found in Elliot's garage, matching the type and fiber structure of the cord tied around Hannah's neck bones. The forensic technician presented microscopic photos showing nylon fiber breakage marks consistent with strong pulling force, with the timing determined to correspond to 2005 through polymer aging analysis. The jury watched each photo intently, their expressions growing more grave with every slide. The prosecution closed the chain of evidence with Elliot's confession, recorded and played through an audio segment. Elliot's voice trembled, mixed with suppressed sobs. "I just wanted her to calm down. I didn't mean to do it. I buried her at Easley." The prosecutor paused the audio at the right moment, avoiding the emotional portion to prevent being accused of appealing to sentiment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miss Langdon said, "no one knew where Hannah was buried, except the person who took her there. No one could describe the burial site, matching the excavated stratigraphy, except the person who dug it." The defense countered by claiming Elliot confessed, under interrogation pressure, but Rhodes was called to the stand and clearly explained the process. Elliot was not threatened, not detained beyond allowable time, was read his rights, given water, allowed breaks, and only confessed after being confronted with the DNA evidence. His confession matched every detail with the objective evidence we had never disclosed to the press or the public. In the final part, the prosecution reconstructed the sequence of events using the 3D model already presented in the forensic reconstruction phase, but showed it only to the jury on a small screen to avoid excessive visual impact. Miss Langdon concluded, "We are not asking you to speculate. We are only asking you to look at the facts, the DNA, the timeline, the physical evidence, the confession, and the body found exactly where the defendant described it. There is no room for mistake." When the prosecution sat down, the courtroom fell dead silent. No one dared to breathe loudly. The defense attorney stood up, but clearly lacked confidence. He spoke of reasonable doubt, of a man under psychological pressure, of the lack of direct witnesses. But each sentence seemed to fall into emptiness, because the jury had heard and seen an unbroken chain of evidence. Finally, the judge allowed the jury to retire for deliberations. The door closed, and in that moment, the 12-year-old case, once buried and then revived through technology, witnesses, and perseverance, now rested entirely in the hands of 12 people who would decide whether the truth just reconstructed would become justice or not. When the jury returned to the courtroom after 4 hours of deliberation, the atmosphere was so thick that everyone seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Elliot sat upright, but his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white, while Rhodes stood behind the prosecution bench, silently observing without showing any emotion. The foreperson stood up, voice steady and clear. "We, the jury of Boone County, find the defendant Elliot Hawthorne guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of first-degree kidnapping, guilty." A sharp gasp and a choked sob rose from Hannah's family side, while Elliot bowed his head deeply, his shoulders trembling slightly. The judge read the final sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus a consecutive 30 years for the kidnapping, and sentence long enough to ensure Elliot would never walk out of a Missouri state prison. Rhodes closed his eyes for a moment, not out of triumph, but from the sense of closing a chapter that had dragged on far too long. A chapter whose every page was stained with the loss of a 17-year-old girl, robbed of her future. After the trial, the Columbia Police Department held a press conference where the spokesperson announced that the Hannah Whitford case file was officially closed after 12 years. Thanks to the combination of modern DNA technology, genealogical mapping, the perseverance of Detective Rhodes, and the forensic team, along with community support, the case has now been resolved conclusively. A large timeline board was set up behind them, marking every milestone from the night Hannah disappeared, through the long frozen period, to the moment the DNA finally led them to the perpetrator. Rhodes was invited to speak. Standing in front of dozens of cameras and bright lights, he spoke slowly. Not with pride, but with the sobriety of someone who had witnessed too many unsolved cases. This case teaches us that no detail is too small to ignore. 12 years ago, we didn't have the technology to look deeply into mixed DNA, didn't have software to enhance blurry camera images, didn't have genealogical databases to narrow down hundreds of suspects, but the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits to be seen, he continued. And the most important lesson is in missing persons investigations, time is not only the enemy, it can also become an ally, if we know how to keep the file alive, know how to return to it at the right moment, with tools we didn't have 5 or 10 years earlier. When the press conference ended, Rhodes stood outside the building in the gentle breeze of a Missouri autumn afternoon, watching the crowd gradually disperse as the late-day golden sunlight fell on the stone steps. He knew that no justice could completely fill the void Hannah left behind, but at least the truth had been brought to light. The perpetrator had been convicted, and Hannah Whitford's name had been restored to its rightful place in the records, no longer missing, no longer unsolved, but solved and closed. After 12 years, Rhodes could finally place the thick case file on the shelf, closing a long journey with solemn silence, the silence that only exists in cases where justice, though late, still finds its way back. In the story of the Hannah Whitford case, many details not only expose the fragility of personal safety in modern American life, but also reflect how today's society must confront risks in very ordinary situations, such as walking alone through a parking lot after an evening at the mall. Hannah did nothing wrong. She simply stepped into a dimly lit area where a solitary man like Elliot Hawthorne was standing, carrying undiagnosed psychological voids. This is a powerful reminder that in a vast country like the United States, where individualism creates a certain distance between people, moments of lowered vigilance can become serious vulnerabilities. The story also demonstrates the power of modern technology. Blurry 2005 cameras once useless, but by 2011-2017, image enhancement, mixed DNA analysis, and genealogy turned seemingly meaningless details into the final solution. The lesson for life today is that no effort is ever wasted, especially when we live in an era where digital evidence and biological data can be illuminated over time. Additionally, Rhodes's perseverance reflects the quality American society has always valued: personal responsibility and the belief that truth is worth pursuing to the end. The case shows that community systems and law enforcement agencies must work closely together, from street cameras and DMV databases to tips from the community and the victim's family. For every individual living in the United States today, the clear lesson is always stay aware of your surroundings, especially in parking lots, gas stations, and poorly lit areas. Share your itinerary with loved ones when going out at night. And if you witness anything unusual, take action. A small tip could save a life. Finally, the story emphasizes that justice may come late, but it does not vanish, as long as there are people persistent enough to keep the light shining into the darkness. Thank you for following to the end of this 12-year journey to bring Hannah Whitford's truth back into the light. If you want to continue joining me on stories of determined case solving like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring cases that seemed buried by time, but ultimately found their voice.